My husband walked out of the luxury boutique while I was paying for his $15,000 celebration gift. Just a few minutes, he smiled, kissing my cheek. I need to feed the meter. I stood at the register waiting for my corporate card to clear. Then my old sorority sister who managed the store looked at the terminal, her face draining of color. She did not hand the card back. Instead, she grabbed my arm and whispered, "Ma'am, please come with me." Before I share my story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had your entire reality shattered in the blink of an eye. My name is Maya. I am 33 years old, and I am the founder of a highly profitable supply chain logistics firm in Atlanta. I built my empire from a single leased delivery truck carrying freight across state lines into a massive fleet servicing the entire Southeast. I am accustomed to handling high-pressure crises, navigating sudden supply chain collapses, and negotiating multi-million-dollar government contracts. I pride myself on being observant and always 3 steps ahead of the competition. But absolutely nothing in my professional experience could have prepared me for a sunny Tuesday afternoon inside a high-end watch boutique in Buckhead. Julian, my husband of 5 years, was supposedly celebrating a massive promotion at work. At least that was the narrative he sold me. He worked as a financial consultant at a mid-tier wealth management firm downtown. His career trajectory had been frustratingly stagnant for the last 3 years, mostly because he preferred networking at golf courses over actually sitting at his desk crunching numbers. I often brushed off his lack of ambition because I loved him and wanted to be supportive. But yesterday, he came home vibrating with excitement, announcing he had finally landed a new client portfolio that would guarantee him a senior partner position. I wanted to reward him. I had always been the primary earner, bringing in significantly more income than he did, and I knew that secretly bothered his pride. So I brought him to this exclusive boutique to pick out a custom timepiece. It was meant to be a $15,000 token of my pride in his achievement, a tangible representation of our shared success. The boutique smelled of polished leather and expensive imported citrus cologne. Julian was completely in his element, trying on a heavy platinum watch and admiring his reflection in the mirrored counter. He looked incredibly handsome wearing a tailored navy suit I bought him for our 5th anniversary 2 months prior. He flashed me that signature charismatic smile, the exact same smile that completely disarmed me when we first met at a crowded alumni mixer years ago. "This is the one, Maya," he said, tracing the edge of the sparkling watch face. "Are you absolutely sure it is not too much?" I smiled warmly, pulling my sleek metal corporate card from my wallet. "Nothing is too much for my husband," I told him, my voice full of genuine affection. "You earned this, Julian. I am so incredibly proud of you and all the hard work you have put in recently." He leaned down and pressed a soft, lingering kiss to my cheek. His cologne was familiar and comforting. "You are the absolute best wife a man could ever ask for," he murmured against my skin, his hand resting briefly on my shoulder. "Let me go feed the parking meter outside before we get an expensive ticket. The meter maids in Buckhead are absolutely ruthless today. I will be back in just a few minutes." I watched him walk out the heavy glass doors, the bright midday Georgia sun catching his broad shoulders as he moved down the sidewalk. Standing there, I felt a profound sense of peace and contentment. We had survived some rocky patches in our marriage recently. There were late nights where he claimed to be entertaining difficult clients and weekends where he was inexplicably unreachable for hours. But seeing him so happy today, I convinced myself those lingering worries were just the toxic byproduct of my own stressful logistics schedule. I turned back to the glass counter, placing my card directly on the velvet presentation mat. Standing across from me behind the register was Keisha. We had pledged the same historically black sorority back when we were undergraduates at Spelman College. We were not exactly best friends who talked every day, but we shared that deep, unspoken sisterhood bond characterized by mutual respect and occasional friendly catch-ups at homecoming tailgates. Keisha had always been impeccably professional, the flawless and poised manager of a luxury retail space catering to Atlanta's elite clientele. She picked up my corporate card, but she did not process the transaction immediately. She had been unnervingly quiet since Julian and I first walked into the store. I had originally assumed she was just giving us professional space to shop and browse, but now, standing face to face, her expression was completely rigid. Her perfectly manicured hands hesitated over the payment terminal, her eyes fixed on the plastic in her grip. "So how have you been lately, Keisha?" I asked, attempting to fill the suddenly heavy and awkward silence between us. It has been quite a while since we saw each other at the Founders' Day Gala last spring. She did not look up to meet my eyes. Her gaze remained rigidly fixed on my card, and then shifted slowly to the computer screen illuminated beneath the glass counter. "I am doing fine, Maya," she said, her voice sounding strangely hollow and devoid of its usual customer service warmth. "Just processing the transaction right now." She swiped the heavy metal card through the machine. We stood in complete silence, waiting for the familiar comforting beep of financial approval. Instead, the machine emitted a harsh, flat electronic tone, "Declined." I chuckled lightly, reaching into my bag to pull another card from my wallet. "That is so weird," I said, brushing off the minor inconvenience. "The fraud protection department probably flagged it. The bank is always overly cautious when I make large luxury purchases outside of my usual business vendors for the logistics fleet. Try this other one instead. It is linked directly to our high-yield joint savings account. There is more than enough capital in there to cover this watch 10 times over." Keisha took the second card without saying a word. She swiped it deliberately. The exact same harsh, flat tone echoed in the perfectly quiet store. "Declined." My brow furrowed in genuine confusion. That was mathematically impossible. I had personally checked that joint account yesterday morning. It held the bulk of our liquid marital assets, a substantial financial safety net I had meticulously built and funded over the last 4 years of my business growth. "Let me just check my banking app," I muttered, feeling a sudden flash of heat and embarrassment on my neck. I pulled out my phone and quickly logged into my secure banking portal. What I saw on the digital screen did not make any logical sense. The numbers literally blurred together before my eyes. The high-yield joint savings account was completely empty. The balance read a flat 0. Panic, a cold, sharp, and agonizing spike of it, pierced directly through my chest. I rapidly toggled the screen to view the secondary savings account. 0. The emergency overflow account. 0. 3 separate accounts containing hundreds of thousands of hard-earned dollars had been systematically and ruthlessly drained. The detailed transaction history showed the funds had been wire transferred out to an unknown external routing number exactly 45 minutes ago. I stared down at the screen, my breath catching painfully in my throat. Julian had not been at work 45 minutes ago. He had been supposedly grabbing us iced coffees from a cafe down the street before we met at the boutique. My analytical mind raced frantically, trying to find a logical, non-malicious explanation. A massive bank error. A catastrophic targeted identity theft. A terrible glitch in the banking server. "Keisha," I started, my voice trembling slightly as I looked back up at her. "Something is very wrong with my accounts. I think I need to call the fraud department immediately. Someone has stolen our money." Keisha did not offer a polite retail apology. She did not suggest I try calling my bank or offer a different payment method. The professional facade, the carefully constructed demeanor of a high-end luxury boutique manager completely vanished from her face. She reached directly across the glass display counter and clamped her hand firmly over my wrist. Her grip was incredibly tight, urgent, and shockingly cold. "Maya," she whispered, her voice dropping a full octave into something deeply serious. "Stop looking at your phone right now." I looked up, completely startled by the fierce intensity burning in her eyes. The polished retail worker was entirely gone. This was the fierce, protective woman I remembered from our college days, a sister recognizing a threat. "Keisha, what is going on?" I asked, my confusion rapidly mounting into genuine fear. She let go of my wrist, stepped out quickly from behind the register, and walked straight to the front of the store. Without a word of explanation, she locked the heavy glass doors of the boutique and flipped the open sign to closed right in the absolute middle of a busy Tuesday afternoon. Then she marched back to me, grabbing my arm once again. Do not say a single word, she commanded quietly, but forcefully. Just come with me to the back office. Right now. She physically pulled me past the gleaming displays of flawless diamonds and imported watches. The conditioned air in the store suddenly felt thick and suffocating. We stepped into the cramped, windowless manager's office located in the back storage area. Keisha slammed the heavy wooden door shut behind us and immediately engaged the deadbolt. The loud metallic click of the lock sounded exactly like a gunshot in the tiny confined room. She turned to face me, her chest heaving slightly as if she had just sprinted a mile. Maya, I am going to show you something on this screen, and I need you to promise me you are not going to scream or lose your composure. I swallowed hard, the phone still clutched tightly in my hand, displaying the devastating zeros of my empty bank accounts. Keisha, you are really scaring me. What is happening? Where is the money from my accounts? What does Julian have to do with this? She did not answer my desperate questions. Instead, she turned toward the large desk taking up half the small room. Two security monitors sat on top, displaying various camera angles of the boutique floor. Keisha grabbed the computer mouse and clicked rapidly, pulling up a recorded video file from the archives. Julian did not come here just now to look at watches to celebrate his promotion. Maya, she said, her voice tight with suppressed anger and profound sadness. He was already here this morning, 45 minutes ago, right before you arrived. She hit the play button on the security video. The digital timestamp glowing in the bottom right corner proved she was telling the absolute truth. I watched the illuminated screen frozen in absolute silent disbelief as my entire reality prepared to violently shatter. The high-definition monitor on Keisha's desk flickered to life. The security feed was crystal clear, displaying a digital timestamp in the bottom right corner, reading 9:15 this morning. Exactly 45 minutes before I walked through the front doors of the boutique to buy my husband a celebration gift. I stared at the screen, watching Julian stride into the frame. He was wearing the exact same tailored navy suit I had just complimented him on. But his posture was entirely different. Around me, he always played the role of the supportive, slightly eager husband trying to prove his worth. On this screen, he walked like a man who owned the world. He was not alone. A woman stepped into the frame beside him. It was Harper, my brother-in-law Malik's wife. Harper, with her perpetually perfect blonde blowout and that exhausting air of superiority she carried everywhere. My mother-in-law Beatrice absolutely worshipped the ground Harper walked on. Beatrice constantly reminded anyone who would listen that Harper brought generational wealth and refined Connecticut class to the family. She never missed an opportunity to contrast Harper's leisurely country club brunches with my early morning warehouse inspections. To Beatrice, I was just a blue-collar hustler who got lucky moving freight. Harper was the prize. On the glowing screen, I watched Julian turn to his brother's wife. He did not offer a friendly family greeting. He pulled her waist flush against his own, tangling his hands in her blonde hair, and kissed her deeply. It was a passionate, desperate kind of kiss, right there in the middle of the luxury jewelry floor. My stomach immediately turned to ice. The temperature in the small back office seemed to drop 10 degrees, but I did not blink. I kept my eyes locked on the monitor, absorbing every single detail. Keisha stood silently beside me. She knew I did not need pity right now. I needed facts. I watched Julian point toward the velvet display case. The sales associate wearing white gloves carefully pulled out a ring box. It held a massive, obnoxious cushion-cut diamond. Harper slipped it onto her right hand, admiring how the stones caught the boutique lights. She smiled brilliantly, kissed my husband again, and nodded. Keisha reached across the desk and slid a piece of printed thermal paper toward me. It was the transaction receipt. I looked at the total line, $85,000. My eyes tracked slowly down to the payment method. Visa ending in 4092. That was my secondary corporate account. It was the emergency operational line of credit for my supply chain logistics firm, designed specifically to cover unexpected fleet repairs or sudden diesel fuel spikes across the Southeast. Julian was technically an authorized user on that account from our very first year of marriage when we incorporated the business together as a legal formality. However, I had explicitly and legally barred him from touching those funds 2 years ago after he secretly sank $50,000 into a fraudulent technology startup run by his college buddies. He knew the strict financial parameters. He knew touching that card was a violation of our corporate agreement. He swiped it anyway. The pieces of the puzzle began snapping together in my mind with terrifying speed. I did not gasp. I did not break down in tears. I operate a company that manages millions of dollars in commercial freight and complex supply chain networks. When a crisis hits my distribution lines, I do not panic. I analyze the damage and I neutralize the threat. I pulled my phone from my handbag. The biometric scanner read my face and unlocked my secure banking portal. I tapped on our primary high-yield joint savings account. The screen loaded a spinning circle, testing my patience for exactly 3 seconds. Available balance $0.00. My heart gave a single hard thud against my ribs. I immediately tapped the secondary overflow savings account, $0. I navigated to the joint tax reserve account, $0. I scrolled down to the detailed transaction history. 3 massive wire transfers had been initiated exactly 47 minutes ago. They were routed to an unknown offshore holding account, nearly $600,000 of my hard-earned capital. The money I bled for. The financial safety net I built working grueling 16-hour days negotiating government contracts while Julian played golf with his mediocre finance friends. All of it was gone in a single digital breath. Julian did not step outside to feed a parking meter. You do not feed a meter when you have just stolen over $500,000 and purchased a diamond ring for your brother's wife. You run. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. He used the excuse of the $15,000 watch purchase to get me out of the house. He brought me to this specific boutique because he knew Keisha worked here, assuming the transaction would distract me long enough for his wire transfers to clear international banking protocols. He calculated the exact amount of time he needed to escape. He used my love, my genuine desire to celebrate his fictional promotion as the ultimate weapon to destroy me. The betrayal was so absolute, so layered and precise, it temporarily robbed me of oxygen. Julian and Harper had been planning this extraction. They were burning my entire life to the ground and expecting to casually walk away with the ashes. I looked up from my phone, returning my gaze to the security monitor. The video file had looped back to the beginning. Julian and Harper smiling, kissing, plotting. I refused to be a victim. I refused to be the broken wife sobbing on a boutique floor, wondering where her life went wrong. I am Maya. I built an empire out of sheer willpower, and I will completely dismantle anyone who tries to take it from me. The silence in the back office was heavy and thick. Keisha placed a hand on my shoulder, her grip firm and grounding. She was waiting for me to break. Instead, I stood up straight, smoothed the lapels of my tailored blazer, and took a slow, deliberate breath. Right at that exact moment, my phone vibrated violently in my palm. The screen lit up with a new incoming text message. The sender name flashed across the glass. Beatrice, my mother-in-law. I swiped the notification open. The text read exactly like every other communication I had ever received from that woman, dripping with unchecked condescension and thinly veiled disgust. Don't be late for Sunday dinner today. Malik and Harper have a huge announcement. Please try to wear your hair straight for once and don't embarrass us in your work clothes. I stared at the glowing words on the screen, reading them twice to ensure I was fully processing the sheer audacity. A huge announcement. Beatrice loved to elevate Harper at my expense. She loved to gather her church friends and celebrate Harper's supposed old money pedigree, while actively reminding the room that my natural hair and business suits were somehow unrefined. Beatrice had absolutely no idea that her precious financial consultant's son just wiped out his family's savings to buy a diamond for his brother's wife. Or maybe she did know. The toxicity in this family ran deeper than blood, and Beatrice had never once defended me when Julian crossed a line. They expected me to walk into their sprawling suburban home today and play the role of the dutiful, quiet wife. They expected me to swallow their subtle racial insults, eat their dry pot roast, and politely applaud whatever ridiculous charade Harper and Malik were putting on. Julian thought he had completely outsmarted me. He thought I was standing at the jewelry counter right now, panicking over a declined corporate card, completely unaware that he was halfway to the airport with his stolen fortune. He was wrong. He was so incredibly, tragically wrong. I locked my phone and dropped it back into my handbag. I turned to look at Keisha, my posture rigid and my mind racing with immediate tactical responses. "Thank you for showing me this," I said, my voice perfectly steady and devoid of all emotion. "I need a digital copy of that security footage on a flash drive, and I need you to print the physical receipt for the ring. Right now. I am going to Sunday dinner. I am going to walk right into the viper's nest. And I am going to watch them all burn." The drive up Georgia State Route 400 gave me exactly 40 minutes to bury my rage beneath a flawless layer of polished concrete. I did not speed. I did not swerve between lanes or grip the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I simply drove, letting the aggressive air conditioning of my matte black SUV cool the residual heat of betrayal radiating from my skin. My mind, usually occupied with dispatch routes and warehouse capacities, was now a hyperactive chessboard. I was categorizing marital assets, calculating legal liabilities, and preparing for the absolute worst-case financial scenarios. Julian had severely underestimated the woman he married. You do not build a logistics empire from the ground up without knowing how to identify a catastrophic leak and sever the infected supply line. By the time I pulled into the sprawling circular driveway of Beatrice's Alpharetta estate, I was no longer a wounded wife bleeding out on a boutique floor. I was a predator stepping calmly into a cage of incredibly stupid prey. The house was an excessive monument to suburban vanity. Massive white columns flanked the heavy mahogany double doors, screaming a desperation for status that only new money trying desperately to act like old money could achieve. Before I could even raise my hand to ring the bell, Beatrice pulled the heavy door open. She wore a pristine pastel cardigan draped over her shoulders, and a smile that looked physically painful to maintain. "Maya," she drawled, looking me up and down with laser-focused judgment. "You actually made it on time for once. And in your work clothes again. I just assumed you would be elbow-deep in diesel fuel or whatever it is you do down at those loud warehouses." I smiled, letting the insult slide right off me like water over glass. "Supply chain logistics, Beatrice. It keeps the entire national economy running." She waved a dismissive hand covered in gaudy cocktail rings. "Yes, well, hard physical labor is certainly commendable for some people. We cannot all have Harper's refined background. Generational wealth just affords a certain unmistakable elegance, doesn't it? Come inside. Do not track dirt onto the Persian rug." I stepped past her into the grand foyer, the scent of roasting rosemary and expensive synthetic air fresheners hitting me instantly. The living room was a carefully curated stage set, and the actors were already perfectly in position. Julian stood by the marble fireplace, holding a heavy crystal tumbler of amber bourbon. When he saw me, his eyes lit up with that trademark manufactured charm. He crossed the room with easy, confident strides and wrapped his arm securely around my waist, pressing a warm, lingering kiss to my forehead. "There is my beautiful, hard-working wife," he announced loudly, ensuring his mother heard every single syllable. "I missed you today, baby. How was the warehouse?" It took every ounce of my self-control, every remnant of my hardened professional discipline, not to knee him directly in the groin. His touch made my skin crawl. His familiar cologne, the one I bought him for his birthday, suddenly smelled like deception and rot. Instead of recoiling, I placed my hands flat against his tailored chest, feeling the steady, calm beat of a heart that belonged to an absolute sociopath. "The warehouse was perfectly fine, Julian," I replied, keeping my tone light, breezy, and conversational. "Just handling some unexpected and massive inventory losses. Nothing I cannot manage." He chuckled, completely missing the lethal double meaning of my words, and kissed my cheek again. From the corner of the room, Harper approached holding a delicate glass of chilled white wine. She was wearing a flowing silk dress that probably cost more than a standard monthly mortgage payment, perfectly playing her usual role of the innocent Southern belle. "Maya," she cooed, leaning in for a brief, contactless hug that smelled of expensive floral perfume. "You look so incredibly tired. You really should let Julian take care of you more. A woman should not have to work her fingers to the bone like a common laborer. It simply ages you prematurely. I smiled back, holding her gaze just a second longer than was socially acceptable. I actually enjoy building things from scratch, Harper. It gives me a deep sense of ownership and control over my own destiny. You should try it sometime. As she turned to walk back toward the sprawling gourmet kitchen, my eyes fell naturally to her designer handbag, resting open on the velvet settee. Protruding just slightly from the interior zipper pocket was the distinct sharp corner of a heavy black velvet ring box. The exact same luxury box I had just watched the jeweler slide across the glass counter less than an hour ago. The sheer audacity of it was physically staggering. She had brought the stolen diamond, the physical evidence of my looted bank accounts, directly into her mother-in-law's house, while her actual husband was standing just 20 feet away. I glanced through those massive French doors leading to the manicured backyard patio. Malik, Julian's older brother, was outside, standing by the built-in outdoor grill. He was laughing at something on his phone, holding a pair of tongs, completely oblivious to the fact that his beautiful wife and his own flesh-and-blood brother were actively dismantling his entire existence. Malik was a genuinely good man, a pediatric dentist who spent his weekends volunteering at free clinics for underprivileged children. He adored Harper, worshipped the ground she walked on, and he trusted Julian implicitly. Watching him stand out there so relaxed and unsuspecting ignited a fresh wave of cold, calculated fury in my chest. I pushed open the French doors and stepped out onto the patio. The warm Georgia air enveloped me as I walked over to my brother-in-law. Malik looked up from his phone, his warm brown eyes crinkling at the corners. "Maya," he said, wrapping me in a genuine bear hug. "It is so good to see you. You work too hard, sis." I hugged him back, feeling a sharp pang of genuine sorrow for the storm that was about to hit him. "Someone has to keep the empire running," Malik, I said softly, stepping back. He flipped a burger on the grill and gestured toward the house with his tongs. "Julian is in a great mood today. Harper, too. They have been whispering and giggling like school kids all afternoon. I think Julian's new promotion has them both excited about the future." My jaw tightened, but I kept my smile securely in place. "Yes, Malik, they certainly seem very excited about the future." I left him to his grilling and stepped back inside the house. I did not scream. I did not flip the heavy glass coffee table or drag Harper out the front door by her perfect blonde extensions. I simply walked over to the wet bar, poured myself a generous glass of full-bodied red wine, and sat down in a plush armchair. I crossed my legs, sipping the dark liquid, letting the rich flavor coat my tongue as I settled in to watch the rats scurry blindly through their little maze. Beatrice practically floated back into the living room, clapping her hands together sharply to gather everyone's attention. "Dinner is ready," she sang, directing us all toward the massive formal dining room with sweeping gestures. We took our assigned seats, the fine silver clinking gently against porcelain plates in the quiet room. The roast beef sat untouched in the center of the table. Before anyone could serve themselves a single portion, Beatrice picked up her crystal water goblet and tapped it sharply with a silver spoon. The ringing sound cut through the low family chatter, demanding absolute and immediate silence. "I have a very special toast," she announced, her chest puffed out with immense pride, her eyes shining with unshed tears of joy. "Today is a monumental day for our family. Julian and Harper have made a brilliant and strategic financial decision together. They have decided to officially merge their investment assets to purchase a luxury commercial property downtown. It is going to secure our family's wealthy legacy for generations to come." She beamed, looking directly at Julian, who offered a modest, self-deprecating smile. "And the best part is," she continued, raising her glass higher, "it is all being completely funded by Julian's massive new corporate bonus. Let us raise a glass to smart money." The sound of fine crystal clinking echoed around the grand dining room. I raised my own glass of red wine to my lips, taking a slow, deliberate sip. Beatrice beamed with absolute adoration at her youngest son, while Harper lowered her gaze in a performance of perfect Southern modesty. Malik raised his beer, totally oblivious to the fact that the money they were celebrating had just been stolen from my corporate accounts to buy his wife a diamond ring. Julian smiled broadly, soaking in the praise. He looked so incredibly pleased with himself, so utterly convinced of his own genius. I set my wine glass down on the pristine linen tablecloth. The soft clink of the glass drew their attention. "That is such wonderful news, Julian," I said, my voice perfectly pitched to sound like a supportive, proud wife. "A massive bonus is exactly what we need right now." Which account did they deposit it into, by the way? I was checking our joint high-yield savings earlier today, and I did not see any new pending transfers. Did you route it through the secondary corporate card by mistake? The temperature in the dining room plummeted instantly. Beatrice paused with her glass halfway to her mouth, her perfectly drawn eyebrows pulling together in a sharp frown of disapproval. Harper went completely rigid. All the manufactured color drained rapidly from her face, leaving her looking pale and terrified. She quickly folded her hands in her lap, hiding her right hand beneath the table napkin. Malik laughed, oblivious to the sudden tension. "Yeah, little brother, where are you hiding all that cash?" Julian did not laugh. The charismatic smile he had been wearing all afternoon completely vanished, replaced by a look of sheer panic. His eyes darted from my face to Harper, and then back to me. He swallowed hard, the muscles in his jaw working frantically as he tried to construct a lie on the spot. "Oh, you know how corporate payroll is, Maya," he stammered, forcing a strained chuckle that sounded like grinding metal. "The funds are probably just caught up in an administrative holding pattern. We can look at the routing numbers together when we get home tonight. Let us not bore everyone with our accounting logistics during a family dinner." I smiled sweetly, tilting my head. "I am not bored at all, darling. I am actually fascinated, especially since almost $600,000 vanished from our joint accounts exactly 1 hour ago." Beatrice gasped loudly, placing a hand over her pearl necklace. "Maya, what on earth are you talking about?" Before I could utter another word, Julian was out of his chair. He moved with alarming speed, rounding the large dining table and grabbing my upper arm. His fingers dug painfully into my skin, squeezing with a forceful aggression he had never shown me before. "Excuse us for just a minute, Julian," announced to the table, his voice tight and breathless. "Maya has been working incredibly long hours at the warehouse this week. The stress is clearly making her a little confused. I just need to help her get some fresh air." He did not wait for me to stand. He physically hauled me out of my chair and dragged me away from the dining room. I let him pull me, not because I was weak, but because I wanted to hear exactly what kind of ridiculous justification he had prepared. He yanked me down the long, dimly lit hallway, leading toward the guest bathrooms, far away from the prying eyes and listening ears of his mother and brother. When we were finally alone, he shoved me roughly against the heavy floral wallpaper. He crowded my personal space, leaning in close so I could smell the expensive bourbon on his breath. The mask was completely gone now. The man standing in front of me was not the loving husband I had supported for 5 years. He was a cornered, desperate animal. "What is wrong with you, Maya?" he hissed, his face inches from mine. "Are you completely out of your mind? Why would you bring up our private finances in front of my entire family? You are acting completely hysterical." I stared calmly into his panicked eyes, ignoring the throbbing pain in my arm where he had grabbed me. "I am not hysterical, Julian. I am simply asking where my money went. The money I earned. The money you stole while you were supposedly feeding a parking meter." Julian let out a sharp, cruel laugh. He shook his head, running a hand nervously through his hair. "Stole? You think I stole from you? You are truly paranoid, Maya. You know that. This is exactly why I had to take control of the situation. You are financially abusive. You hold your little logistics business over my head every single day, acting like you are some kind of corporate savior while I am just the poor husband." I maintained my steady breathing, refusing to give him the emotional reaction he so desperately craved. "So draining our life savings and sending it to an offshore account was your way of taking control." "I moved the funds to protect us." He spat, his voice dripping with venomous, righteous indignation. "You are reckless, Maya. You bleed money into that glorified trucking company of yours, buying new rigs and expanding routes without ever consulting me. I had to secure our future before you bankrupted both of us with your massive ego. I am the financial consultant. I am the one who actually understands wealth management." I took that money to place it in a secure trust to protect my family from your poor decisions. The absolute sheer audacity of his gaslighting was almost impressive. He was staring me dead in the face, actively attempting to convince me that committing felony wire fraud was a noble act of marital preservation. He wanted me to doubt my own reality. He wanted me to believe that my successful multi-million-dollar empire was a liability and that his theft was a rescue mission. You used my corporate card to buy Harper an $85,000 diamond ring. I stated my tone perfectly flat and devoid of any fluctuation. Did you buy that to protect our financial future too, Julian? He flinched. A tiny microscopic twitch of his left eye gave away his absolute terror. But he recovered instantly, doubling down on his aggressive narrative. You are snooping through my transactions now. You are tracking my movements. You are completely toxic, Maya. He leaned closer, pointing a finger aggressively at my chest. I bought that ring as an investment piece for the family portfolio. Harper is helping me secure a commercial real estate deal that will make us millions. Something you would not understand because you are too busy playing blue-collar boss in a dirty warehouse. You are constantly emasculating me. You never support my vision. He took a deep breath, puffing out his chest to project dominance. Here is what is going to happen, Maya. You are going to walk back into that dining room. You are going to sit down, smile, and apologize to my mother for your little outburst. You are going to play the role of a supportive, loving wife. If you do not, if you say one more word about the accounts or the ring, I will walk out that front door right now. I will leave you. I will file for divorce, and with my legal connections, I will take half of everything you own. Do you understand me? You need me, Maya. You are nothing but an exhausted workaholic without me. I looked at the man I had promised to spend my life with. I saw the weakness radiating from every pore of his body. He was trying to break my spirit using the threat of abandonment as a weapon. He actually believed I would crumble begging him to stay. I simply smiled, a cold, sharp curving of my lips that made him take an involuntary step backward. Before I could formulate my response, the sound of heavy, clumsy footsteps echoed from the far end of the hallway. The swinging door to the kitchen banged open, and Malik stumbled out into the corridor. He was holding a fresh bottle of beer in one hand and half a glass of bourbon in the other. His eyes were glassy and red, his steps uneven as he swayed toward us. "There he is!" Malik shouted, his voice slurring loudly in the enclosed space. "The man of the hour." Julian immediately dropped his aggressive posture, spinning around to face his older brother with a forced, panicked smile. "Hey, Malik! We were just heading back to the table. Maya just needed a minute." Malik laughed, a loud, booming sound that bounced off the hallway walls. He threw his heavy arm around Julian's shoulder, nearly knocking them both off balance. He clinked his beer bottle against Julian's empty crystal glass, spilling a few drops of amber liquid onto the floral wallpaper. "I just wanted to say thank you, little brother," Malik slurred, leaning heavily against Julian. "I know I give you a hard time about your finance jobs, but you really came through for us today. Harper told me everything." Julian froze. His entire body went rigid beneath his brother's arm. "Told you what, Malik?" Malik chuckled, shaking his head with drunken affection. "About the corporate paperwork, man. Harper told me how you sat down with her lawyers yesterday and helped her draft all those beautiful legal documents." Malik took a long, slow drink from his beer, completely missing the look of absolute horror washing over Julian's face. He turned to me, offering a sloppy, appreciative grin. "Maya, you have a great husband here," he said, pointing at Julian. "Really looking out for family. Harper is filing those documents first thing tomorrow morning. Once she claims that 50% ownership equity in your logistics company, we are going to be completely set for life. The commercial property we are buying with Julian's bonus is just the beginning. Welcome to the big leagues, Maya. We are officially business partners." Malik patted my shoulder affectionately, belched softly, and stumbled back down the hallway toward the dining room, humming a cheerful, off-key tune. The silence that followed his departure was heavy enough to crush bone. Julian stood completely paralyzed, staring down the empty hallway. He slowly turned his head to look at me, his face the color of wet ash. He had not just stolen my cash. He and Harper had drafted fraudulent corporate paperwork to legally seize half of my entire supply chain empire. They were planning a complete hostile takeover by sunrise. Julian opened his mouth to speak, to spin another web of lies, to gaslight his way out of the corner he had just painted himself into. I did not let him. I simply smoothed the front of my blazer, looked him directly in his terrified eyes, and smiled. "Let us go finish our dinner, darling," I said, walking past him toward the dining room. "We have a lot to celebrate." I stood up from the dinner table with the kind of grace that usually terrified my competitors in a boardroom. The atmosphere was stifling heavy with the scent of roasted meat and the suffocating perfume Beatrice insisted on wearing. Everyone expected me to crumble, to demand answers, or to beg for a shred of dignity. I gave them none of that. I simply smoothed my skirt, offered a tight, polite smile that signaled nothing, and walked out the front door. My breathing only returned to a rhythmic pace once the heavy mahogany door of the estate clicked shut behind me. The cool night air of the Atlanta suburbs felt like salvation. My car was waiting, and for the first time in years, I was driving away from a conflict with a clear, surgical focus. I did not head home. I did not return to the house that Julian was currently using as a staging ground for his betrayal. I headed straight for the glass and steel tower downtown, where my corporate attorney kept an office that never truly slept. Sterling was a man who lived and breathed risk mitigation. He was ruthless, expensive, and the only person in the city who understood the specific high-stakes nature of my logistics empire. He was waiting for me in his office, the skyline of Atlanta, reflecting off the windows behind him. He did not look surprised to see me at midnight. He simply gestured to the leather chair opposite his desk and pushed a glass of scotch toward me. I did not drink it. I went straight to the point. "Julian is making his move, Sterling." Tonight at dinner, he announced a merger of assets to purchase a commercial property with a massive bonus. He is setting the trap. Sterling nodded, his expression shifting into that cold, clinical mask of a legal predator. "I expected this months ago, Maya. You have been moving the pieces into place. Everything is prepared." I leaned forward, my hands flat on his polished desk. "I need to know that the wall is impenetrable. Julian thinks he is stealing a multi-million-dollar logistics firm. He thinks he is taking the intellectual property, the government contracts, and the fleet equity. I need you to confirm that there is nothing for him to take." Sterling pulled a thick, leather-bound file from his drawer. He opened it, revealing the structure that had become my lifeline. It was an irrevocable blind trust. When we drafted this over a year ago, we placed every single heavy asset, every proprietary routing algorithm, and every government contract under the protection of this trust. You are the sole beneficiary, Maya. The firm itself, the physical assets, the intellectual property, they no longer reside under the LLC that Julian has access to. That shell company is currently a liability vehicle. It carries our debts, our operational overhead, and our long-term leases. Julian is trying to steal an empty vessel. It is a hollow shell filled with nothing but debt and paperwork. A sharp, humorless laugh escaped my throat. Julian had spent weeks trying to maneuver the paperwork, gaslighting me at every turn, convincing me he was managing our future, when in reality, he was frantically trying to loot a carcass. He was too greedy to realize that I had gutted the company from the inside out and moved the soul of the business into a vault he could not touch. He would sign those transfer deeds with such arrogance, believing he was claiming a throne, only to find himself sitting on a mountain of lawsuits and operational debt. Sterling poured himself a drink and sat back watching me. "He has been sloppy, Maya. Greed has a way of blinding even the most careful deceiver. He thinks he is clever, but he is merely predictable. He has been accessing the secondary corporate card, hasn't he?" I nodded. "He used it today for a purchase. A large one." Sterling checked his computer, his fingers flying across the keys. "I have been monitoring that account. He has been funneling small amounts for months, but today he made a significant withdrawal. He is desperate. He is not just planning to steal your company, Maya. He is planning to vanish." The air in the office grew colder. My mind was already racing through the implications. If he was planning to vanish, he needed liquidity. He needed a clean break. The logistics firm was his primary target, but he would not leave behind any other potential assets he could liquidate. Sterling suddenly stopped typing. His brow furrowed as he stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in his glasses. His demeanor shifted from calculated to alarmed. Maya, I am running a rapid credit and public records check on your personal holdings just to be safe. I know you said you kept the residential assets separate, but I need to see the current status of the mortgage on your shared home. My heart skipped a beat. The house was our only major joint asset. I had resisted moving it into the trust because of the tax complexities involved in primary residences. I trusted Julian to manage the mortgage payments while I focused on the business. Sterling tapped his desk. This is not good. I am looking at a filing from 3 days ago. There is a secondary loan against the deed. It is a home equity line of credit for $500,000. I stood up the chair, scraping loudly against the floor. That is impossible. I never signed for that. That deed is in both our names. It requires both of our signatures for any equity release. Sterling looked up at me, and his eyes were full of a dark, grim realization. Maya, look at this. He turned the screen toward me, displaying a digital copy of the loan documents. There was a signature at the bottom. It looked like mine. It was a perfect, frightening imitation of my own handwriting. My breath hitched. The forgery was impeccable. It was the work of someone who had spent years watching me sign documents, someone who had practiced the curve of my letters and the pressure of my pen until they could replicate my identity perfectly. Julian had not just stolen my money and attempted to steal my company. He had committed federal mortgage fraud. He had leveraged the roof over my head to fund his escape with Harper. The betrayal was no longer just financial. It was criminal, it was invasive, and it was deeply personal. He had stolen the very ground I stood on. The anger that had been simmering in my chest crystallized into cold, hard metal. He had made the fatal mistake of underestimating me for the last time. As I stared at the forged document, I felt the walls of my life shifting. I was no longer fighting for my business. I was now fighting for my survival. And in this fight, I would show no mercy. The drive from Sterling's downtown office back to our marital home was a masterclass in compartmentalization. The glowing streetlights of Atlanta bled into the heavy darkness of the affluent northern suburbs as I gripped the leather steering wheel. My mind, a finely tuned instrument designed to manage global supply chains and massive distribution grids, methodically processed the catastrophic data Sterling had just handed me. Julian had forged my signature. He had leveraged the very roof over my head for $500,000. He was no longer a cheating, opportunistic husband playing games with corporate credit cards. He was a highly dangerous, hostile threat to my freedom. I pulled my vehicle into the 3-car garage, wincing slightly at the sound of the heavy mechanical door grinding shut. I sat in the driver's seat for a full minute, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. I took one long, calculated breath and stepped into the mudroom. The house was a sprawling 5-bedroom monument to our supposed success, but tonight it felt like a hostile labyrinth. I slipped off my heels, walking silently in my stocking feet. The dark hardwood floors were freezing against my skin. From the second floor, the rhythmic, heavy sound of Julian's snoring drifted down the grand staircase. He was sleeping with the profound, arrogant peace of a man who believed his perfect crime was already completely secure. I bypassed the master suite and moved swiftly down the hall to my private dressing room. A woman in my position does not survive in a male-dominated industry without contingency plans. I pulled a sleek, unassuming black duffel bag from the top shelf. I moved with clinical precision, selecting my gear. 3 pairs of practical dark clothing, comfortable running shoes, my spare passport. I reached into a hollowed-out decorative book on the shelf and pulled out a thick manila envelope containing $10,000 in emergency cash that Julian knew absolutely nothing about. I dropped it into the bag alongside the encrypted burner phone Sterling had handed me across his desk an hour ago. If Julian realized his forgery had been discovered, the situation would escalate from financial warfare to physical danger in a matter of seconds. I needed an extraction protocol. I zipped the heavy canvas bag shut and shoved it deep into the shadows beneath a row of winter coats, perfectly positioned for a rapid exit. Now it was time for the offensive maneuver. I crept back down the corridor to Julian's home office. The room smelled of aged leather and the expensive scotch he liked to parade in front of his mediocre finance friends. His silver laptop sat on the center of the massive oak desk, pulsing gently in sleep mode. I sat in his high-backed leather chair, the residual warmth of his presence long gone, and flipped the screen open. The password prompt glared at me. Julian was a creature of habit entirely ruled by his own ego and his current obsessions. I tried our anniversary date. Incorrect. I tried his mother's maiden name. Incorrect. A cold, cynical thought settled in the back of my brain. I typed in Harper's birth date. The desktop materialized instantly. A wave of pure, acidic disgust washed over me, but I forced it down into the dark vault where I kept my panic. I pulled the high-capacity military-grade flash drive from my blazer pocket and jammed it into the side port. I initiated the rapid cloning software Sterling had provided. A gray progress bar appeared on the screen, calculating the data volume. 22 minutes remaining. I did not have the luxury of sitting idly while the machine worked. I needed to know the exact parameters of the ambush they were planning. I opened his mail application. At first glance, it was entirely mundane. Golf tee times, client newsletters, banking alerts from his personal checking account. But Julian was fundamentally sloppy. He always thought he was the smartest person in the room, which meant he would hide things in plain sight. I accessed the hidden library directory on his local drive. Deep within a maze of system folders, I found an encrypted locked directory labeled simply as Project Alpine. The password was the same as the laptop: Harper's birthday. The folder unzipped, vomiting hundreds of emails and digital documents across the screen. I clicked on the oldest thread, my eyes scanning the harsh, damning text. The first message was dated 2 years and 4 months ago. I cannot stop thinking about the hotel yesterday. Harper had written her words a digital dagger. Malik suspects absolutely nothing. He is so utterly blind. He actually thanked me for spending time with his little brother. We have to be more careful, but I need to see you again. My stomach gave a violent, sickening lurch. 2 years? They had been carrying on this charade right under Malik's nose, smiling at him across holiday tables, accepting his generous gifts, pretending to be a loyal family while completely desecrating his marriage. I sorted the files by date, clicking on a message from exactly 3 weeks ago. The ultrasound confirmed it. Julian Harper wrote, "The timeline is undeniable. It is yours. We are going to have a son. Beatrice wants Malik and I to make a huge announcement at Sunday dinner. I will smile and let him think he is finally becoming a father. He is so incredibly pathetic, crying over the sonogram pictures. It will make our exit that much sweeter." I stopped breathing. The huge announcement Beatrice had texted me about. Malik thought he was finally starting a family after years of trying. He was actually raising his brother's bastard child. The cruelty was so absolute, so structurally perfect, it temporarily paralyzed my hands. I forced myself to keep moving. I opened the final document, a PDF titled Exit Strategy, dated just yesterday. It laid out a timeline that made the blood in my veins run cold. They were not just running away. They were building a federal cage for me. Maya's forged signature is secure on the equity line Julian had written in a memo to a shady offshore financial consultant. The $500,000 clears Monday morning. I have fabricated vendor invoices from her Hollow Logistics LLC. We will initiate a wire transfer routing the equity funds through her business accounts and directly into our Parisian trust. Her lawyer Sterling will try to untangle it, but the paper trail will show Maya authorizing the embezzlement to cover failing business debts. By the time the Federal Corporate Fraud Unit knocks on her door, Harper and I will be safely boarding the private charter to Charles de Gaulle. Paris is waiting, my love. He intended to leave me facing federal prison time. He was going to frame me for stealing my own forged home equity using my own company as the murder weapon. The progress bar on the screen flashed a brilliant, aggressive green. 100%. Clone complete. I reached out my fingers, wrapping around the cold metal casing of the flash drive. A loud, sharp click echoed like a gunshot in the silent house. The heavy overhead lights flooded the office with a blinding, aggressive glare. I froze, my hand hovering just inches above the keyboard. I turned my head slowly, calculating the distance to the door and weighing my physical options. Julian was standing directly in the doorway. He was wearing silk pajama pants, his bare chest rising and falling heavily. The charming, bumbling, supportive husband persona was completely gone. His face was a mask of cold, predatory rage. He stepped fully into the room, his broad shoulders effectively blocking the only exit. Maya, why are you on my computer at 3 in the morning? Maya, why are you on my computer at 3 in the morning? I did not flinch. I did not scramble to slam the silver laptop shut or desperately try to hide the military-grade flash drive resting securely in the deep fleece pocket of my robe. Panic is a luxury reserved for those who do not have a plan. I slowly swiveled the heavy leather executive chair to face my husband, letting out a long, ragged sigh that perfectly mimicked a woman buckling under the immense weight of corporate stress. Because my primary network gateway crashed, I said, rubbing the bridge of my nose as if staving off a severe migraine. And dispatch just called me in an absolute panic. We have 3 refrigerated transport trucks stranded on Interstate 20 without cleared federal manifests. If those perishables spoil before sunrise, we lose a $200,000 account. I needed a secure terminal to remote into the main server. Julian stared at me from the doorway, his eyes narrowing as his alcohol-addled brain processed the information. He hated the logistics business. He hated the late-night crises, the smell of diesel fumes, and the messy, unglamorous realities of the immense wealth I generated. His pristine, white-collar arrogance always blinded him to the actual gritty mechanics of my work. And you could not use your own laptop, he snapped, stepping further into the room, his aggressive posture returning. It is out in the car, I replied smoothly, standing up and sliding my hands into my pockets. I did not want to wake you by turning on the bedroom lights to dig around for my keys. Sorry for invading your sacred space. His posture immediately relaxed. The cornered predatory rage dissolved back into that smug, condescending superiority he wore so effortlessly. He believed me. He believed I was just a stressed, overworked woman, desperately trying to keep a chaotic blue-collar business afloat. He genuinely thought he was the undisputed master of our domain. You work way too hard, Maya, he murmured, crossing the room to stand directly beside the desk. You are running yourself into the ground over these stupid trucks. He reached out and gently closed his laptop, patting the aluminum casing. He had absolutely no idea that every single piece of his digital life, every illicit email, every fraudulent bank transfer, and every vile message to his pregnant mistress was now resting comfortably in my pocket. Actually, since you are awake, Julian continued, his tone shifting into something dangerously casual. It was the exact tone he used right before he lied to my face. He opened the top drawer of his desk and pulled out a thick stack of stapled papers. I was going to give these to you at breakfast, but we might as well handle it right now while you are in work mode. Sterling's office sent over the routine quarterly tax compliance forms for the LLC. They need your signature first thing in the morning so I can file them. He slid the heavy stack across the polished oak. A sleek silver pen rested perfectly on top. I looked down at the documents. The cover page was a standard tax declaration, something I signed routinely 4 times a year without a second thought. But I knew Julian. I knew his game. With a practiced, casual flick of my wrist, I fanned out the thick pages beneath the innocuous cover sheet. There it was. Buried beneath the dense, boring tax jargon were 3 pages of binding legal text, an operating agreement amendment, a transfer of equity shares, a binding declaration naming Harper as a 50% managing partner in my logistics firm, effective immediately upon signing. He was trying to trick me into signing away half of my empire under the guise of midnight tax compliance. The sheer, unadulterated disrespect of the maneuver made the blood pound fiercely in my ears. He honestly thought I was too tired, too compliant, and too stupid to read what I was signing. I picked up the silver pen. The metal was cool against my skin. I looked up at Julian. He was watching me intently, a faint sheen of nervous sweat forming on his forehead despite the aggressive air conditioning. He was holding his breath, waiting for the trap to spring shut. What he did not know, what he could not possibly comprehend, was that the company listed on these documents was a ghost. Sterling and I had hollowed out the LLC 14 months ago. We had legally transferred every heavy asset, every proprietary routing algorithm, and every lucrative government contract into an irrevocable blind trust solely under my name. The LLC Julian was currently trying to steal was an empty shell filled with nothing but our operational overhead and long-term lease debts. He was stealing a burning building. Just the highlighted tabs, right? I asked, my voice laced with manufactured fatigue. Yes, Julian said quickly, eagerly tapping the bright yellow sticky notes marking the signature lines. Just sign there and I will drop them at the courier's office on my way to the firm tomorrow. I pressed the pen to the paper, but I did not write my name. When you run a multi-million-dollar corporation, your signature is your most highly guarded asset. My legal signature, the one registered with the banks, the federal government, and the state licensing boards, was a very specific stylized sequence. What I wrote on Julian's fraudulent transfer deeds was a deliberate, chaotic variation. I altered the slant of the letters. I purposefully dropped my middle initial. I changed the final loop entirely. To a casual observer, it read as Maya. To any forensic accountant, bank manager, or corporate judge, it was an immediate, glaring mismatch. It was legally void. I flipped through the pages, signing the invalid mark on every single yellow tab. I was handing him a loaded weapon, knowing full well it would explode directly in his face the moment he tried to pull the trigger. Done, I said, tossing the pen back onto the desk. I pushed the stack of papers toward him. Can I go to bed now? The trucks are moving and I am absolutely exhausted. Julian snatched the papers up with a speed that betrayed his intense desperation. He looked down at the signatures, a slow, triumphant smile spreading across his handsome face. He had won. He had conquered the blue-collar wife and secured his fortune. Of course, baby, he whispered, stepping forward to kiss my cheek. Go get some sleep. I will handle everything from here. I walked out of his office, the flash drive burning a hole in my pocket. I did not go to sleep. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the sun to rise so I could burn his entire world to the ground. The Atlanta traffic the next morning was brutally slow, but I did not mind. I sat in the back of my chauffeured town car, analyzing the digital files I had stripped from Julian's computer. The depths of his betrayal were staggering. Harper was not just an opportunistic mistress. She was a master manipulator. The emails detailed how she had manipulated Malik into paying for her luxury lifestyle while funneling his money directly into Julian's offshore accounts. They mocked Malik's devotion. They laughed at my long hours. They were parasites feeding off the host body of our family. I arrived at my corporate headquarters just before 9. The building was a hive of intense activity, dispatchers shouting into headsets, logistics managers rerouting shipments, the steady, powerful heartbeat of the real empire Julian knew nothing about. I bypassed the main floor and took the private elevator directly to the executive suite. I needed to finalize the lockdown with Sterling. We had to ensure the irrevocable blind trust was completely insulated from the fallout of Julian's imminent arrest for the mortgage fraud he had committed on our house. Before I could even reach my office door, it flew open. David, my chief financial officer, stood in the threshold. He was a veteran accountant who had navigated 2 massive recessions and a global supply chain crisis without ever losing his cool. Right now, he was pale, sweating profusely, and clutching a thick manila folder to his chest like a shield. Maya, David gasped, his voice tight with raw panic. We have a massive security breach. I stepped into the office and shut the heavy door behind us, cutting off the noise of the bullpen. Calm down, David. What exactly are you looking at? He dropped the folder onto my pristine glass desk. 10 minutes ago, an urgent wire transfer request hit the primary accounts payable queue. It was submitted using your highest executive authorization codes, the emergency codes only you and Julian possess. My eyes locked onto the paperwork. And the target. David swallowed hard. It is an attempt to intercept the final payment from the Department of Defense contract, $2 million in liquid capital. The routing instructions completely bypass our corporate ledger. The money is being redirected to a private offshore holding account. I leaned over the desk, reading the printed routing information. The account name was buried under a string of complex numbers, but the registering entity was painfully clear. It was an LLC registered in Paris. The exact same LLC Harper had referenced in her emails to Julian. This was the Department of Defense logistics contract, the contract I bled for, the one that required 18 months of grueling negotiations, endless federal audits, and sleepless nights. Julian wanted to harvest the fruits of my labor to fund a romantic Parisian getaway with my brother-in-law's pregnant wife. They were not waiting for the fraudulent transfer deeds to clear. They were actively looting the operational accounts, while they thought I was distracted by the fake company takeover. Julian was trying to steal the final $2 million in cash before he boarded his flight. Maya, David said, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper. The bank flagged it because of the international destination, but the authorization codes are absolutely perfect. If I do not initiate a manual override within the next 3 minutes, the funds will clear international banking protocols. $2 million will just vanish. My fingers flew across the sleek glass surface of my keyboard. $2 million. Julian was not just trying to bleed the company dry, he was attempting to sever the jugular in one massive fatal strike. David stood beside my desk, shaking visibly, his breath hitching in his chest. I bypassed the standard employee security protocols and immediately accessed the root administrative terminal for our corporate banking portal. The system demanded a secondary biometric authentication and a rolling cipher code. I typed my master override sequence and slammed the enter key with brutal force. The screen blinked a harsh warning red. Transfer manually canceled, funds secured. David let out a heavy breath that sounded like a deflating tire. He slumped into one of the Italian leather guest chairs, burying his face in his trembling hands. We did not have the luxury of taking a moment to recover. I immediately picked up my desk phone and dialed the direct priority line to the Federal Fraud Division of our primary banking institution. I bypassed the automated system, completely punching in my Platinum Enterprise PIN. A senior compliance officer named Vance answered on the second ring. I authorized a total hard freeze on all outgoing transactions associated with the Primary Logistics LLC. No wire transfers, no cashier checks, no automated clearinghouse disbursements. I mandated that absolutely every financial movement required my physical in-person signature at the downtown branch under dual camera surveillance. Vance initiated the immediate lockdown protocol, but his voice suddenly dropped an octave. He flagged a highly irregular discrepancy. Julian had not just attempted the massive $2 million heist. He had tested the waters an hour earlier while I was driving to the office. He had successfully pushed through a smaller stealth wire of $150,000 to the exact same Parisian holding company. It was clearly meant to be his immediate operational cash for the escape to cover private charters and elite accommodations. I felt a cold, calculating knot tighten in my stomach. I asked Vance for the exact status of the $150,000. He tracked the digital footprint through the International Clearinghouse grid. The funds had left our domestic branch but were currently sitting in a temporary holding queue, awaiting foreign currency conversion approval. Trap it! I ordered, my voice leaving absolutely no room for debate. Initiate a federal fraud recall protocol immediately. Classify the transfer as a compromised internal breach and flag the destination account for international money laundering. Vance typed furiously on his end, confirming the action. The money was now effectively frozen in a digital purgatory. Julian no longer had access to the funds in Atlanta, and the Parisian shell company would never receive the deposit. He was completely cut off from his own escape funds. He just did not know it yet. I hung up the phone and looked at my exhausted chief financial officer. I instructed David to go home, take his family to their cabin in the mountains, and turn off his cellular phone for the next 3 days. The fallout was going to be biblical, and I needed my loyal staff safely out of the blast radius. Just as David scurried out of the executive suite, the heavy glass door swung open again without a knock. It was not another panicked executive. It was Beatrice. My mother-in-law stood in the threshold, radiating arrogant entitlement. She wore a tailored cream-colored Chanel suit, a suffocating amount of heavy floral perfume, and an expression of utter disdain. She looked around my corner office, as if the logistics empire funding her luxurious country club lifestyle was nothing more than a dirty mechanic's garage. Beatrice marched up to my desk and dropped a thick embossed ivory envelope right on top of my keyboard. I looked down at the gold foil lettering and then up at her, waiting for the inevitable demand. She did not disappoint. "I need a check for $20,000, Maya," she announced, her voice loud and commanding, echoing off the glass walls. The premier florist for Harper's baby shower has completely revamped the floral arrangements, and the caterer requires their final deposit by noon today. I am handling the event planning, and I expect you to cover the remaining balance from the corporate expense account. I stared at the woman. Her sheer audacity was breathtaking. She was demanding that I fund a lavish party for the child her son had secretly conceived with his own brother's wife. She was asking the betrayed working wife to foot the bill for the ultimate family disgrace. I folded my hands, calmly resting them on the polished desk. "No." Beatrice blinked, her perfectly manicured eyebrows drawing together in sharp, furious confusion. "Excuse me." I said. "No, Beatrice. I am not writing a $20,000 check for a baby shower. You and Malik can cover the extravagant expenses for his growing family. The business accounts are currently under a routine corporate audit, and personal expenditures are strictly prohibited by federal guidelines." Beatrice's face flushed an ugly mottled red. She slammed her hand down on the glass desk, her rings clicking sharply against the surface. "You are incredibly selfish, Maya. You sit here in this sterile office obsessed with diesel trucks and shipping routes while your sister-in-law is actually expanding our family. Harper is giving Malik the greatest blessing in the world. She is fulfilling her fundamental duties as a wife, something you have spectacularly failed to do." I let her venomous words wash over me. A year ago, that comment would have devastated me. It would have sent me into a dark spiral of inadequacy and guilt. Today, it just confirmed exactly who Beatrice was. She was a vicious, shallow woman who measured a person's worth entirely by their compliance to her social image. Harper played the dutiful pregnant wife beautifully, while secretly plotting to destroy the entire family structure. I remained entirely passive, showing zero emotion. "You are just jealous," Beatrice sneered, her voice dripping with pure spite. "You are bitter because you cannot provide an heir, and now you are punishing poor Harper out of sheer resentment. Thank God Julian is the real provider in this marriage. He does not need your little shipping company. He is securing massive commercial real estate deals right now." "Massive deals, Maya? He actually takes care of his family." I tilted my head, feigning mild amusement. "Really? Massive real estate deals? Julian never mentions his highly successful independent ventures to me." Beatrice smiled a triumphant, ugly smirk, believing she had finally struck a nerve. "Of course he does not. He knows exactly how insecure you get when he succeeds on his own merit. In fact, he is so incredibly successful, he is taking Harper on a private trip to celebrate. They are flying to Paris this Friday. He claims it is a real estate scouting trip, but we all know he just wants to spoil his sister-in-law before the baby comes. He is such a generous, thoughtful man." Friday. My mind locked onto the word like a heat-seeking missile. Friday. Today was Wednesday morning. They were not waiting until the end of the month to execute their plan. The forged transfer deeds, the attempted $2 million wire, the hidden Paris accounts. It was all culminating in exactly 48 hours. Beatrice had just handed me their entire operational timeline on a silver platter because she simply could not resist an opportunity to insult me. Julian and Harper were planning to board a private charter to France in 2 days, leaving behind a gutted company, a shattered Malik, and a federal corporate fraud case with my name printed on the indictment. I smiled at my mother-in-law, a slow, chillingly empty smile that finally made her step back from the desk in sudden unease. "Have a wonderful time at the baby shower, Beatrice," I said softly, my voice smooth as glass. I am absolutely certain it will be an event no one in this family will ever forget. I watched her storm out of the office completely unaware that she had just sealed her favorite son's fate. As the heavy glass door clicked shut, I picked up my encrypted phone. I had exactly 48 hours to finalize the trap and drop the guillotine on Julian's neck. The air inside the grand ballroom of the Atlanta History Center was thick with the scent of imported orchids and desperate ambition. The annual spring charity gala was the pinnacle of the city's social calendar. It was a place where fortunes were flaunted, alliances were forged, and reputations were quietly slaughtered over flutes of vintage champagne. I stepped through the gilded entrance doors wearing a custom emerald silk gown that fit like liquid armor. Tonight I was not merely an attendee, I was the executioner. Julian had arrived an hour earlier with Beatrice Malik and Harper, claiming he needed to network with the Foundation's board of directors. I knew the truth. He wanted to parade his pregnant mistress around the room under the guise of family unity, soaking in the admiration of his peers, while he counted down the final 48 hours until his flight to Paris. I moved through the sea of tuxedos and designer dresses with the serene, untouchable grace of a woman who had absolutely nothing left to lose. Across the room, near the towering ice sculpture, I spotted the family. Beatrice was holding court with a group of major political donors and highly influential real estate magnates. She wore an ostentatious diamond necklace that looked heavy enough to choke her, gesturing grandly as she spoke. I approached silently, slipping into the periphery of their circle just as Beatrice delivered her opening strike. "These logistics contracts are terribly tedious," Beatrice was saying, offering a dismissive, elegant wave of her hand. "My daughter-in-law Maya manages the warehouses, of course. Blue-collar work, really. Moving boxes from one dusty loading dock to another. But if you want to understand the true business mind of our family, the real visionary for our future investments, you must speak with Harper." Beatrice pulled Harper forward by the arm. Harper wore a blush-colored maternity gown designed to perfectly accentuate her growing stomach. She offered the wealthy donors a demure, flawlessly practiced smile, playing the role of the humble genius to absolute perfection. "Harper has a brilliant grasp on international markets," Beatrice continued, her voice carrying loudly over the hum of the string quartet. "She is advising Julian on a massive overseas expansion. We are simply thrilled. Maya is a hard worker, bless her heart, but she lacks the refinement required for global finance." The donors nodded politely, murmuring their impressed agreements. I stepped fully into the light. "I completely agree, Beatrice," I said. My voice was smooth, carrying a cheerful melodic tone that made the entire group turn toward me in surprise. I extended my hand to a state senator standing nearby. International finance requires a very specific kind of ruthlessness. Harper has an incredible talent for acquiring assets that belong to other people. I could never dream of operating the way she does. Harper's fake smile faltered. A brief, jagged flash of confusion crossed her face. Beatrice simply scoffed, mistaking my precise insult for an admission of defeat. "Exactly," Beatrice sneered, adjusting her silk shawl. "It takes breeding to understand true wealth. You stick to your little delivery trucks, Maya. Leave the empire building to the professionals." I offered Beatrice a radiant, utterly hollow smile and turned away, gliding toward the silent auction tables lining the far wall of the ballroom. I could feel Harper's eyes burning a hole into my back. I did not have to wait long for the confrontation. The psychological pressure of my sudden compliance was already tearing at her nerves. Within 5 minutes, Harper abandoned Beatrice's circle and cornered me near a display of luxury sports cars up for auction. Malik was nowhere in sight, likely fetching her another sparkling water. She stood entirely too close, her posture radiating an arrogant, territorial hostility. "You should really watch your tone when you speak to Beatrice," Harper hissed, dropping the sweet, demure persona instantly. "She is the matriarch of this family. If she decides you are an embarrassment, your life in this city is effectively over." I slowly turned to face her. I looked down at the glass of sparkling cider in her hand, and then I looked at the massive glittering stone sitting proudly on her right ring finger. She had been waving that hand around all night, making absolutely certain it caught the light from the crystal chandeliers. It was a vulgar, aggressive display of stolen wealth. She noticed my gaze. Harper lifted her chin, her lips curling into a vicious, triumphant smirk. She held her hand up slightly, forcing the diamond into my direct line of sight. "Julian has such exquisite taste," she whispered, her voice laced with pure venom. He wanted to make sure the mother of his true heir felt properly appreciated. "You would not understand, Maya. You only ever cared about ledgers and bank accounts. You never understood how to make a man feel like a king. That is why he is leaving you with nothing." I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. I let a long, agonizing silence stretch between us until the triumphant smirk on her face began to slowly rot into unease. I smiled. It was a terrifying, joyful expression. "Oh, Harper, it truly is a stunning piece," I said, my voice deliberately loud, cutting clearly through the ambient noise of the gala. Several wealthy guests browsing the auction tables turned to look at us. I stepped closer, invading her personal space, projecting my voice so every person within a 20-foot radius could hear my enthusiastic compliment. "A flawless, radiant cut," I announced, admiring the stone. "Exactly 4.5 carats. VS1 clarity, completely colorless. And that setting is remarkable. Solid platinum, with micropave diamonds along the band. It is a custom piece from the private vault at Maison de Cartier on Peachtree Street, isn't it?" Harper froze. Her breath hitched in her throat. The smug arrogance melted off her face, replaced instantly by a stark, terrifying realization. I raised my voice slightly, maintaining my bright, cheerful facade. "The craftsmanship is undeniable, and it should be, considering the retail price is exactly $85,000. Cartier is so strict about their high-end inventory. They demand an immediate wire transfer from a verified corporate account for anything over $50,000, do they not?" The color completely drained from Harper's face. She looked like a woman who had just stepped onto a landmine and heard the dreadful click of the trigger beneath her heel. Her eyes widened, darting frantically around the room, realizing that people were listening. You cannot possibly know that," she stammered, her voice dropping to a panicked, breathless whisper. I leaned in, my lips brushing against her ear. I could smell the expensive vanilla lotion she wore. "I know every single breath you take, Harper," I whispered, the cheerful facade vanishing, leaving nothing but absolute freezing menace. "I know about the ultrasound. I know about the offshore account in Paris. And I know Julian used my secondary corporate credit line to wire $85,000 to Cartier last Tuesday at 2 in the afternoon. Enjoy the ring. It is the last expensive thing you will ever wear." I pulled back, smiled warmly at her terrified, ash-white face, and walked away. I left her standing frozen in the middle of the ballroom, clutching her stomach, her chest heaving as a full-blown panic attack began to set in. The evening was advancing and the silent auction was reaching its climax. Julian, fueled by premium scotch and his own delusion of impending victory, had migrated to the digital bidding terminals at the center of the room. He was surrounded by a small crowd of local politicians and competing businessmen. He was putting on a show, playing the role of the fearless, deep-pocketed tycoon. I stood in the shadows near the grand staircase, a fresh glass of mineral water in my hand, watching the final act unfold. Julian was engaged in a bidding war over the crown jewel of the charity auction. It was a 2-week private yacht charter through the Mediterranean, complete with a helicopter transfer and a Michelin-starred personal chef. He was laughing loudly, clapping a city councilman on the back as he keyed his bids into the glowing touchscreen terminal. $50,000, Julian announced, his voice booming across the room. He puffed out his chest, throwing a smug, challenging look at a rival real estate developer. "Let us put some real money on the table for these charities, gentlemen." The crowd offered a round of polite, impressed applause. The auctioneer smiled warmly, gesturing to the card reader attached to the terminal. "A remarkable bid, Julian. If you would please authorize the holding deposit, the package is yours." Julian reached into the breast pocket of his tailored tuxedo. He pulled out a sleek, heavy metal card, the secondary corporate expense card tied directly to my primary logistics operations account. The account he believed he controlled, the account he had used to buy Harper's ring, the account he planned to use to fund his flight to Paris in exactly 48 hours. He slid the metal card into the terminal with a dramatic, arrogant flourish. I took a slow sip of my water. The terminal screen pulsed blue, processing the transaction. Julian turned back to the crowd, already raising his scotch glass to accept his impending congratulations. Then the machine emitted a harsh, piercing electronic beep. It was loud enough to slice through the elegant music and the polite chatter. The glowing blue screen instantly snapped to a violent, aggressive red. Julian frowned. He turned back to the screen, his brow furrowing in irritation. "Must be a glitch with the charity network," he muttered, pulling the card out and wiping the magnetic strip on his jacket. He jammed it back into the reader with considerably more force. The machine shrieked again, louder this time. The bold, capitalized text on the terminal screen was large enough for the state senator standing next to him to read perfectly clearly. Transaction denied. Account seized by federal authorities. Contact Bank Fraud Division immediately. The silence that fell over Julian's circle was absolute. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a social execution. The politicians took an immediate, instinctual step backward, physically distancing themselves from the glowing red letters of federal seizure. Julian's face went rigid. The glass of scotch trembled violently in his hand. He stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. He hit the cancel button frantically, jabbing his finger against the glass, trying to erase the damning red text broadcasting his ruin to the most powerful men in the city. The screen did not change. The message remained locked in place, a glaring neon sign announcing his destruction. I stood in the shadows, completely, perfectly still. I watched the arrogant, thieving man I had married crumble into a panicked, humiliated shell. The guillotine had officially dropped, and I was not going to let him up for air. I stepped back deeper into the shadows of the grand staircase, watching Julian frantically tap the unresponsive screen of the silent auction terminal. His face was a portrait of absolute terror. The federal seizure notice glowed an unforgiving, aggressive red, casting a harsh neon light on his perfectly tailored tuxedo. The wealthy political donors and influential businessmen who had been hanging on his every word just moments ago were now actively backing away, treating him like a sudden, highly contagious liability. The whispers were already starting rippling through the elite crowd like a shockwave. I had severed his financial artery in front of the most powerful people in Atlanta. I allowed myself exactly 10 seconds to enjoy the spectacular view of his public destruction. Then I turned on my heel and walked away. The air in the main ballroom was beginning to feel stifling, thick with heavy perfumes and manufactured laughter. I navigated through the oblivious crowd of dancing socialites and made my way toward the grand marble restrooms located in the secluded east wing of the History Center. I needed a moment of quiet isolation to prepare for the final phase of my extraction protocol. The women's lounge was a masterpiece of opulent design featuring floor-to-ceiling Carrara marble gold-plated fixtures and a long row of ornate vanity mirrors. It was completely empty. I set my emerald silk clutch on the counter and turned on the cold water, letting it rush over my wrist to ground my surging adrenaline. The heavy mahogany door swung open with a violent, echoing thud. It slammed against the marble wall, shattering the pristine silence of the cavernous space. Harper stood in the doorway. The delicate, demure sister-in-law persona she had worn so flawlessly all evening was completely obliterated. Her posture was rigid, her hands balled into tight, white-knuckled fists at her sides. The blush-colored maternity gown that had made her look so fragile and innocent just an hour ago now seemed like a ridiculous, ill-fitting costume. Her face was flushed with ugly, blotchy anger, and her eyes burned with a chaotic, desperate hatred. She marched into the room and threw the heavy brass deadbolt, locking us securely inside. I reached for a thick, monogrammed cotton hand towel and dried my hands with deliberate, agonizing slowness. I did not turn around. I simply met her furious gaze in the reflection of the vanity mirror. As I lowered my hands, I subtly brushed my thumb against the sleek, dark face of my smartwatch. 2 rapid taps. A tiny, invisible icon pulsed to life on the digital screen. The high-definition microphone was now actively recording every single sound in the room. "You think you are so incredibly clever," Harper hissed, closing the distance between us until she was standing just inches behind my shoulder. Her voice was shrill, echoing harshly off the cold marble tiles. You think you can just whisper some numbers in my ear and intimidate me? You think a declined credit card is going to stop us from taking what we are owed? I turned around slowly, leaning back against the cold stone counter. I offered her nothing but perfect, unbothered silence. You are pathetic, Maya Harper spat, taking another aggressive step forward. You have always been absolutely pathetic. You are nothing but a blue-collar workhorse pretending she belongs in high society. You walk around in custom designer gowns, but you still smell like a diesel garage. Julian has been laughing at you behind your back for years. He despises you. He touches you and pretends to care about your little logistics company, but every single time he closes his eyes, he is thinking about me. She raised her right hand, flaunting the massive Cartier diamond once again. This time there was no pretense of elegance or high society grace. She wielded the stone like a jagged weapon. 2 years, Maya. She gloated, her voice dripping with toxic venom. 2 entire years, Julian and I have been making an absolute fool out of you. Every time you stayed late at that dirty warehouse to build your precious empire, Julian was in my bed. We took your money. We took your dignity. We took absolutely everything. And Malik. I asked, my voice perfectly flat, carefully prompting her to continue her tirade. Harper threw her head back and let out a sharp, cruel laugh that sounded entirely unhinged. Malik is a weak, pathetic stepping stone. Do you honestly think I could spend the rest of my life with a man who cries over sonogram pictures? He is hopelessly soft. He is a temporary bankroll who served his purpose beautifully. I needed his endless funding to secure my lifestyle until Julian could untangle his assets from your miserable grip. Malik actually believes he is finally getting the family he always wanted. He thinks this baby is his flesh and blood. He has been kissing my stomach and painting the nursery while I actively plan his brother's escape. He is the most gullible fool I have ever met. I completely despise him. I despise his endless optimism and his suffocating, cloying affection. She stepped so close I could see the frantic, erratic pulse beating in her neck. You think you won some sort of victory tonight because you memorized a jewelry receipt? Harper sneered, leaning directly into my face. You have no idea what is actually coming for you. Julian already secured the equity line on your house. He signed the corporate transfer deeds. You are standing here acting like a regal queen while your entire kingdom is actively burning to the ground. I maintained my perfectly neutral expression, ensuring the smartwatch captured every single malicious syllable of her uncoerced confession. By this time tomorrow, Harper continued, her eyes wide with malicious triumph. Julian and I will be sitting in first class on a private charter halfway over the Atlantic Ocean. We are taking the $2 million you so generously secured for us. We have an offshore holding account in Paris that your pathetic domestic lawyers will never be able to touch. We are going to raise our beautiful son in a Parisian penthouse while you face a brutal federal indictment for corporate fraud. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a vicious conspiratorial whisper. Julian made absolutely sure your signature is on every single fraudulent document, Harper hissed. When the federal banking authorities realize the operational funds are completely gone, they are going to raid your corporate offices. They are going to permanently freeze your assets. They are going to drag you out of that warehouse in heavy steel handcuffs. You are going to rot in federal prison, Maya. You will be completely broke. You will be entirely alone. You will have absolutely nothing. And I will have everything. I will have your massive fortune. I will have your handsome husband. I will have the luxurious life you worked your fingers to the bone to build. She stood back, breathing heavily, a twisted, unhinged smile of absolute superiority plastered across her face. She waited for me to break. She waited for the hot tears, the screaming, the desperate, panicked pleas for mercy. She wanted the supreme satisfaction of watching me crumble under the crushing weight of her grand master plan. I looked down at her pregnant stomach and then slowly brought my gaze up to meet her eyes. I let a long, heavy, agonizing silence fill the luxurious marble room. Have a very safe flight. Harper, I said, my voice utterly calm, lacking even a microscopic trace of fear or panic. Make sure you pack warmly. I hear Paris is quite damp and miserable this time of year. Harper's victorious smile violently collapsed. The total absolute absence of panic in my voice unsettled her far more than any screaming match ever could. She searched my eyes for any sign of defeat, for any crack in my armor, and found nothing but cold, impenetrable steel. Her hands began to shake uncontrollably again. She realized with sudden sickening clarity that she had not landed a single psychological blow. "You are completely delusional," Harper snapped, turning sharply on her heel. "You are in complete pathetic denial. Enjoy your final night of freedom, Maya." She marched to the heavy oak door, unlocked the brass deadbolt, and yanked it open with excessive force. She stormed out of the restroom, her heels clicking furiously against the marble floors, the heavy door slamming shut with a resounding final thud. I was alone again. I let out a slow, steady breath. I lifted my left wrist and tapped the digital screen of my smartwatch. The pulsing red recording icon vanished. I had captured 6 uninterrupted minutes of crystal-clear, high-definition audio. It was a complete uncoerced confession of adultery, federal fraud, and malicious intent delivered directly from the mouth of the lead conspirator. It was the kind of pristine, flawless evidence that divorce attorneys and federal prosecutors dream about. I pulled the encrypted black burner phone from my silk clutch. I synced the watch to the device, transferring the audio file in a matter of seconds over the secure connection. I opened a new highly encrypted email draft. I attached the audio recording. I typed in Malik's personal email address, the one I knew he monitored constantly on his phone. I left the body of the email completely blank. In the subject line, I typed 2 words: "Listen closely." I stared at the glowing send button for a fraction of a second. Malik was a genuinely good man. He was a kind, deeply supportive husband who had welcomed me into his family with open arms and endless warmth. He did not deserve the devastating, life-altering pain this audio file was about to inflict upon him, but he desperately needed the unvarnished truth. He needed to know that the woman sleeping next to him was a ruthless predator, and that the child she carried belonged to his treacherous brother. He needed the opportunity to protect himself before they completely destroyed him too. I pressed send. The message vanished into the digital ether, flying across the cellular network directly to the phone currently sitting in Malik's tuxedo pocket out in the grand ballroom. The ugly truth was no longer safely hidden in the shadows. The explosive charge had been officially armed and detonated. I smoothed the fabric of my emerald silk gown, checked my reflection in the gold-framed mirror one final time, and walked confidently out of the restroom, ready to watch the final stage of my revenge unfold. The morning sun filtered through the expansive floor-to-ceiling windows of our Buckhead estate, casting long, sharp shadows across the imported Italian marble floors. The air inside the house was thick, with an unnatural, heavy silence. I stood in the doorway of the chef's kitchen, watching Julian pour himself a double shot of espresso from the gleaming silver machine. He wore a plush cashmere robe over his silk pajamas, looking entirely too comfortable for a man whose corporate credit card had just triggered a federal seizure alert in front of Atlanta's most powerful elite. He had evidently convinced himself that the catastrophic humiliation at the charity gala was nothing more than a temporary banking glitch, or perhaps a petty, spiteful maneuver on my part. He radiated a sickening, smug confidence. He turned around, leaning casually against the granite island, and took a slow, deliberate sip of his espresso. He set the delicate porcelain cup down and slid a thick manila folder across the pristine white stone surface. "Sign them," Julian commanded. His voice held zero trace of the charismatic, loving husband I had known for years. It was cold, transactional, and dripping with absolute disdain. I walked slowly toward the island, my eyes fixed on the heavy brass brads holding the thick stack of legal documents together. I did not need to open the folder to know exactly what it contained. "Divorce papers," Julian stated, answering my unspoken question. "I had my attorneys expedite the drafting process overnight. We are dissolving this marriage, Maya. It has been a suffocating, restrictive burden for far too long, and I am finally cutting the cord." I kept my hands resting loosely at my sides, ensuring my posture conveyed a sense of cautious vulnerability. You are throwing away our entire life together, Julian. Just like that. He let out a sharp, cruel laugh that echoed harshly off the high, vaulted ceilings. Our life together was a prison sentence. You gave me absolutely nothing but neglect and unrealistic expectations. You were so obsessed with your shipping routes and your dirty little warehouses that you completely forgot how to be a wife. My mental health has been utterly decimated by your relentless workaholism. I have suffered profound emotional distress for years. He tapped a perfectly manicured finger against the thick manila folder. That is exactly why my legal team is demanding lifetime spousal support. I am accustomed to a specific standard of living, Maya, and your obsessive neglect is the direct cause of this dissolution. You will be paying me monthly alimony for the rest of your natural life. I looked down at the granite countertop, forcing my shoulders to slump forward in a display of profound defeat. Lifetime alimony. Julian, you know the company cannot sustain that kind of ongoing capital drain. Julian smiled. It was a vicious, predatory expression that transformed his handsome face into something entirely unrecognizable. The company is no longer your primary concern, he purred, leaning forward over the island. You threw a pathetic little tantrum with the corporate cards last night, but it changes absolutely nothing. While you were sleeping, I finalized the transfer of all major domestic and international logistics assets. The ink is dry, Maya. I sold our entire corporate portfolio to Harper's Family Trust. They now hold the controlling interest, and you are officially locked out of the executive suite. I let out a shaky breath, perfectly mimicking the ragged sound of a woman whose entire world had just violently collapsed. You sold my company. It was our company. Julian snapped, his voice rising in sudden arrogant anger. And now it belongs to a family that actually understands global finance. You are finished, Maya. You have been completely outplayed. He pointed a stiff, demanding finger toward the grand staircase. I want you out of my house by noon, he ordered. Pack whatever cheap, sensible clothing you brought into this marriage and leave. The estate is deeded in my name, and I will not have you polluting the environment when Harper comes over this afternoon to celebrate our victory. If you are not gone by 12 o'clock, I will have the private security detail physically throw you onto the street. I stared at him, letting my eyes widen in a flawless imitation of shattered disbelief. I did not scream, I did not argue, I did not throw the espresso machine across the room. I simply lowered my head, letting my hair fall forward to hide the cold, calculating predator lurking just beneath my skin. Okay, Julian, I whispered, my voice trembling with artificial frailty. I will pack my things. I turned and walked slowly up the sweeping curved staircase, ensuring every step looked heavy and burdened. Once inside the master suite, I moved with swift, lethal efficiency. I had no intention of packing the vulgar diamond tennis bracelets or the designer handbags he had purchased using my own hard-earned capital. I pulled a single vintage leather suitcase from the top shelf of the walk-in closet. I packed my grandfather's mechanical pocket watch, 3 tailored business suits, my encrypted laptop, and the sealed envelope containing the original incorporation documents for the logistics firm. I zipped the leather suitcase shut and walked back down the stairs. Julian was no longer in the kitchen. He had retreated to his private study, completely unbothered by the fact that he had just rendered his wife homeless. I walked out the heavy mahogany front doors without looking back. I loaded the single suitcase into the trunk of my car and slid behind the steering wheel. As I pressed the ignition button, the dashboard interface flared to life, and the Bluetooth communication system immediately chimed with an incoming call. The caller ID flashed brightly across the digital screen. Beatrice. I took a deep, steadying breath and tapped the steering wheel to accept the connection. Well, Maya, Beatrice sneered, her voice dripping with triumphant venom. Julian just sent me a rather delightful text message. I understand you are currently vacating the premises. I am leaving, Beatrice, I said, keeping my voice soft and defeated. You got exactly what you wanted. Beatrice let out a sharp, aristocratic bark of laughter. Oh, I secured exactly what I wanted an entire year ago, Maya. You were simply too stupid and too absorbed in your little blue-collar trucking business to notice. Did you honestly believe a woman of my social standing would ever accept a common warehouse manager as a daughter-in-law? You have zero breeding. You have absolutely no pedigree. You were nothing but a temporary stepping stone until Julian could find a woman of true exceptional value. You knew about Harper, I asked, allowing my voice to crack perfectly on the final syllable. Of course I knew. Beatrice gloated, her sheer arrogance overriding any basic sense of human decency. I actively encouraged it. Harper possesses old generational wealth. She understands how the elite operate. We had many lovely lunches at the country club planning this exact transition. Do you know what she promised me, Maya? I gripped the leather steering wheel tightly. What did she promise you, Beatrice? A permanent escape from your suffocating mediocre presence, Beatrice hissed. Once your pathetic little logistics firm is fully liquidated and the assets are absorbed into Harper's family trust, she is purchasing a luxury penthouse for me in Boca Raton. Oceanfront views, exclusive beach access, and an endless supply of neighbors who actually understand how to dress for dinner. I supported this affair because Harper is buying me the lifestyle I deserve. You are a complete failure, Maya. Do not ever attempt to contact this family again. The line clicked dead. Beatrice had hung up, leaving me sitting in the driveway of the estate I had paid for. I slowly lowered my phone. The false frailty vanished from my posture instantly. I shifted the car into drive and accelerated down the long, winding driveway, leaving the sprawling mansion far behind me. Beatrice wanted Boca Raton. Julian wanted a Parisian escape. Harper wanted an empire. They were all going to burn together. I navigated the heavy mid-morning Atlanta traffic and pulled into the subterranean parking garage of the Four Seasons Hotel downtown. I bypassed the main lobby completely and took the private access elevator directly to the penthouse suite. I swiped my keycard and stepped into the sprawling, luxurious room. Sterling was already waiting for me. My lead corporate attorney was a man who operated with the ruthless precision of a military drone strike. He was standing in front of a massive glass whiteboard overlooking the city skyline. The board was covered in complex financial diagrams, interconnected red lines, and printouts of offshore banking profiles. Two forensic accountants sat at the long mahogany dining table, surrounded by towering stacks of banking ledgers and open laptops. Are they fully committed? Sterling asked, not bothering with pleasantries as he turned away from the whiteboard. Julian served the divorce papers this morning, I confirmed, dropping my leather suitcase by the door. He claims he finalized the transfer of all corporate assets to Harper's family trust at midnight. He truly believes he holds all the cards. Beatrice just confessed on a recorded line that she knew about the affair for a year because Harper promised to buy her a luxury condo with the liquidated funds. Sterling adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and let out a low, humorless chuckle. A luxury condo. That is remarkably ambitious considering Harper's family is currently fighting over the copper wiring in their walls. I walked over to the dining table and looked down at the sprawling mess of financial documents. Explain it to me, Sterling. Give me the absolute unvarnished truth about Harper's generational wealth. Sterling stepped up to the whiteboard and tapped a printed photograph of Harper's father, a man renowned in Atlanta high society for his philanthropy and sprawling real estate empire. It is a complete mirage, Maya, Sterling stated, his voice clinical and sharp. Our forensic team spent the last 48 hours digging through the deepest layers of their corporate holding companies. Harper's family is not just bankrupt, they are drowning in a toxic radioactive crater of debt. Her father has been operating a massive illegal Ponzi scheme for the last decade, using fresh investor capital to pay off early stakeholders and fund their lavish country club lifestyle. One of the accountants looked up from his laptop. The federal authorities caught the scent 6 months ago, Ms. Brooks. The Securities and Exchange Commission has been quietly preparing a massive federal indictment. Harper's father is facing 20 years in federal prison and the complete seizure of every single asset they possess. I stared at the financial web drawn on the glass board, the pieces of the puzzle snapping into place with terrifying clarity. Harper did not want Julian. She despised Malik, and she clearly had no true affection for his brother. She was not running away to Paris to start a beautiful new family. She needed a patsy, I whispered, the realization settling over me like a heavy winter chill. She needed massive, untraceable liquid cash to plug the bleeding hole in her father's Ponzi scheme and save her family from a federal indictment. Exactly. Sterling confirmed, pulling a red marker from his pocket. Julian was never going to share that wealth. He was the perfect, arrogant, gullible Mark. Harper used the affair to manipulate him into forging those transfer deeds. Julian genuinely believes he transferred your logistics empire into a joint trust that he will share with Harper in France. In reality, he just legally signed your company over to a bankrupt criminal enterprise that is currently under active federal surveillance. Harper was going to let Julian take the ultimate fall for the corporate theft while she used your millions to bail out her father. My chest tightened as the sheer, malicious brilliance of Harper's plan washed over me. She had weaponized Julian's arrogance perfectly. She stroked his ego, convinced him he was a brilliant tycoon, and let him dig his own grave. My encrypted phone vibrated sharply in my pocket, breaking the heavy silence in the penthouse suite. I pulled the device out and looked at the glowing screen. It was a mass digital invitation sent to an extensive email distribution list that included our entire family structure, prominent local business leaders, and the highest tier of the Atlanta social elite. The graphic featured elegant gold flowing script over a pristine white background. You are cordially invited to a signing and celebration. Join Julian Brooks and Harper Brooks as they toast to a monumental new business acquisition and the beautiful future of their growing family. Tomorrow evening at 8 o'clock, the Piedmont Country Club. Formal attire strictly required. I stared at the screen. The absolute staggering audacity of the invitation was almost difficult to comprehend. They were not running. Julian truly believed his fraudulent documents were ironclad. They were hosting a victory lap at the most exclusive country club in the city, publicly flaunting their new stolen empire and their illicit relationship in front of everyone we knew. They had explicitly included my email address on the distribution list. It was a direct, deliberate challenge. They wanted me to sit alone in the dark, knowing they were celebrating my absolute destruction. I looked up at Sterling. His eyes were locked on my phone. They are hosting a victory party tomorrow night, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, quiet register. They invited the entire social circle. They invited me. Sterling crossed his arms over his chest, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. What is the play, Maya? Do we alert the federal authorities now and shut the party down before the valet even parks their cars? I looked back down at the elegant, glowing invitation. I thought about Beatrice demanding a luxury condo. I thought about Julian serving me divorce papers in his silk pajamas. I thought about Harper standing in the marble restroom, viciously gloating about leaving me homeless and alone. I thought about Malik, who had likely just opened an email containing an audio file that would shatter his entire reality. I tapped the screen of my phone, pulling up the response interface. No, I said firmly. We let them pour the champagne, we let them gather the crowd, we let them stand on the stage and raise their glasses. I hit the large green button at the bottom of the digital invitation, RSVP, attending. The Piedmont Country Club's Grand Magnolia Ballroom was a monument to old Southern wealth and exclusive privilege. The sprawling venue was awash in the warm golden glow of 3 massive crystal chandeliers, illuminating a room packed with the absolute elite of Atlanta high society. Waitstaff in crisp white jackets circulated flawlessly through the crowd, balancing silver trays loaded with beluga caviar and vintage Dom Perignon. The air was thick with the scent of imported white roses and the quiet, dangerous hum of ruthless ambition. This was a room where fortunes were quietly merged over cocktails, and reputations were violently dismantled before the main course was served. Tonight, the entire social registry had gathered to witness the ascension of Julian and Harper, completely unaware they had been summoned to a public slaughter. I arrived exactly 45 minutes after the doors opened. I did not slip in through a side entrance or attempt to blend into the scenery. I pushed open the towering, brass-handled double doors and walked directly into the center of the room. I wore a razor-sharp tailored crimson silk suit that fit like custom armor paired with stiletto heels that struck the polished hardwood floor with the rhythmic, terrifying cadence of a ticking clock. I radiated the absolute untouchable power of a woman who held the executioner's axe and was fully prepared to swing it. The ambient chatter near the entrance died instantly. The silence rippled outward like a shockwave as guests turned to stare. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Champagne flutes hovered frozen in the air. The elite crowd parted instinctively, forming a wide, clear path for me as I glided through the center of the ballroom. I did not offer a single smile or nod of acknowledgement to the whispering onlookers. My eyes were fixed entirely on the front of the room. Julian and Harper stood at the mahogany podium stationed in front of a massive dormant LED presentation screen. Julian wore a custom velvet tuxedo, his chest puffed out with the supreme suffocating arrogance of a man who believed he had successfully conquered the world. Harper was draped over his left arm, wearing a shimmering gold maternity gown, her hand resting conspicuously on her swollen stomach to emphasize the twisted victory of their illicit child. Beatrice sat in the front row of the VIP seating area, practically vibrating with smug satisfaction, surrounded by a court of wealthy socialites she believed she now ruled. Julian tapped his crystal flute with a silver spoon. The sharp, clear ringing silenced the remaining murmurs in the ballroom. He leaned into the microphone, his handsome face twisting into a mocking, condescending smirk as he watched me approach the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," Julian announced, his voice booming across the expansive room. "I want to thank you all for gathering tonight to celebrate the dawn of a monumental new era. We are here to toast to a massive business acquisition, the merging of two great visionary families, and the beautiful future of my growing dynasty." He paused, throwing a highly theatrical, pitying look in my direction. "It is also a night of transitions," Julian continued, adjusting his cuffs. "In business as in life, we must occasionally take over the reins from those who lack the necessary vision. We must make the difficult, necessary choices to trim the dead weight holding us back from true international greatness. We must leave the past behind to secure the future." A smattering of polite, uncomfortable applause rippled through the crowd. Beatrice beamed, raising her glass toward her son in a triumphant salute. I did not stop walking. I bypassed the VIP seating area, entirely ignoring Julian's pathetic attempt at public humiliation. I moved with fluid, lethal purpose toward the elevated audiovisual booth situated at the far left flank of the ballroom stage. The club's technical director stepped forward to intercept me, raising a hand in protest. I shot him a look of such absolute freezing authority that he instantly stepped back and lowered his hands, retreating to the corner of the booth. I reached into the interior pocket of my crimson blazer and pulled out my heavily encrypted digital tablet. I bypassed the standard venue interface, connecting my device directly into the master presentation terminal with a specialized override cable. Julian's mocking smile faltered slightly as he watched me commandeer the technical suite. He leaned back into the microphone, attempting to maintain his facade of supreme control. "Security, please handle this." Julian laughed, though the sound was noticeably strained and entirely devoid of humor. "Please escort my hysterical, soon-to-be ex-wife off the premises. She is clearly having an emotional episode and struggling to let go of the empire I built for her." I did not look at him. I engaged the biometric scanner on my tablet, authenticated the master unlock sequence, and placed my finger over the primary execution icon. I pressed the button. The 30-foot LED presentation screen behind Julian flared to life with the blinding intensity of a magnesium flash. The opulent ballroom was instantly bathed in the stark, clinical white light of the digital display. The screen did not show the glowing, triumphant logo of their newly merged corporate dynasty. It displayed a highly classified, heavily redacted federal legal document. The massive black text was stamped with the unmistakable, aggressive seals of the United States Federal Trade Commission and the Department of the Treasury. It was an irrevocable blind trust agreement. I picked up the spare microphone resting on the technician's mixing console and stepped out of the booth, walking slowly up the side stairs to join them on the main stage. The acoustics of the ballroom amplified my voice with crystal-clear, terrifying precision. "You did not sell a multi-million-dollar logistics empire last night, Julian," I announced, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "You did not secure an international future or a Parisian escape fund. You sold an empty, completely worthless corporate shell." Julian's face went rigid. The arrogant smirk vanished, replaced by a sudden, sickening wave of confusion. He turned to look at the towering screen behind him, his eyes scanning the dense legal jargon detailing the total transfer of physical assets, fleet titles, and international shipping contracts. I stopped 10 feet away from the podium facing the sea of horrified Atlanta elites. 6 months ago, I transferred every single tangible asset, every warehouse deed, every commercial contract, and every cent of liquid capital out of the primary logistics holding company. I explained, keeping my voice smooth, clinical, and completely devoid of mercy. I placed the entire empire into a federally protected, impenetrable, irrevocable blind trust managed directly by an independent board of directors in Delaware. The company you signed over to Harper's Family Trust at midnight was a ghost, Julian. It holds zero assets. It carries zero valuation. You literally sold them a piece of blank paper. The ballroom erupted into a chaotic symphony of shocked gasps and frantic buzzing whispers. The wealthy businessmen in the front rows began murmuring aggressively, realizing they were witnessing a corporate bloodbath of epic proportions. Harper snatched the microphone from Julian's trembling hand. Her face was flushed with panicked, defensive rage. She glared at me, her chest heaving under the gold maternity gown. "You are lying!" Harper shrieked, her voice shrill and entirely unhinged. "You are making this up because you are a bitter, barren failure. My family's trust will absorb your pathetic little operation regardless of your fake paperwork. We have generational wealth. We have more capital and political influence than you could ever dream of comprehending. You cannot touch us." I tilted my head, offering her a slow, genuinely pitying smile. I tapped the secondary execution button on my tablet remote. The massive screen behind them shifted instantly. The blind trust documents vanished. They were replaced by a chaotic, sprawling grid of official federal court dockets, banking seizure notices, and grand jury indictments. The name of Harper's father was printed in bold, undeniable letters across the top of a Securities and Exchange Commission warrant. "You do not have generational wealth, Harper," I stated, the cold finality in my voice silencing the entire room. "You have a criminal enterprise masquerading as a country club legacy." I turned back to the audience, addressing the very people Harper had spent years attempting to impress. "Harper's Family Trust is completely, entirely bankrupt," I revealed, projecting my voice to ensure the people in the back row heard every single damning syllable. For the last 12 years, her father has been operating a massive, highly illegal Ponzi scheme. He has been systematically stealing fresh investor capital to pay off early stakeholders and fund their fraudulent, luxurious lifestyle. The Securities and Exchange Commission raided their corporate offices 3 days ago. They are currently facing multiple federal indictments for wire fraud, money laundering, and grand larceny. The color drained entirely from Harper's face. She staggered backward, her hands flying to her mouth in absolute, unadulterated terror. The crowd in the ballroom physically recoiled. The socialites who had been clamoring to sit near Beatrice just 10 minutes earlier were now actively stepping away, treating the entire family like a sudden, highly toxic infection. The whispers turned into vicious, condemning glares. In their world, losing money was a tragedy. Being exposed as a fraud was an unforgivable, permanent excommunication. Harper needed massive, untraceable liquid cash to plug the bleeding hole in her father's crumbling scheme. I continued, turning my gaze back to Julian, who looked as though he were physically suffocating. So she targeted the most arrogant, gullible, easily manipulated mark she could find. She used an illicit affair to convince you to forge transfer deeds, Julian. She was never going to Paris with you. She was going to drain your accounts, hand the stolen capital to her father, and let you take the absolute unmitigated fall for federal corporate theft. Julian swayed on his feet. The crystal champagne flute slipped from his fingers, shattering violently against the hardwood stage. He stared at Harper, his eyes wide with a horrified, shattered realization. Harper could not even look at him. She was staring at the floor, trembling violently, her entire fraudulent existence reduced to ash in front of the city's most powerful people. "You forged these documents!" Harper screamed, abandoning the microphone and pointing a shaking, desperate finger at me. "You are setting us up. Malik knows the truth. Malik knows I love him. He knows this baby is his. He will destroy you for this. I did not say a single word. I simply pressed the final button on my remote. The federal indictments vanished from the screen. The ballroom speakers emitted a soft electronic click. And then the pristine high-definition audio from the country club restroom blasted through the state-of-the-art surround sound system. Harper's own voice echoed off the walls, vicious, arrogant, and unmistakably clear. Malik is a weak, pathetic stepping stone. Do you honestly think I could spend the rest of my life with a man who cries over sonogram pictures? He is hopelessly soft. He's a temporary bankroll who served his purpose beautifully. Malik actually believes he is finally getting the family he always wanted. He thinks this baby is his flesh and blood. He has been kissing my stomach and painting the nursery while I actively plan his brother's escape. He is the most gullible fool I have ever met. I completely despise him. The audio playback ceased. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. A figure detached itself from the deep shadows near the grand entrance of the ballroom. The crowd parted instantly, creating a wide aisle as Malik strode toward the stage. His face was a terrifying mask of cold, deadened rage. He did not look like the gentle, supportive brother I had known for years. He looked like a man who had entirely hollowed out his own soul. He walked directly to the front row and stopped staring up at the woman carrying a child she had weaponized against him. Harper shrank back, tears streaming down her face, her hands raised in a pathetic, desperate gesture of surrender. "Malik, please," Harper sobbed, her voice breaking. "It is taken out of context. She tricked me. Every joint account is permanently frozen," Harper Malik said. His voice was not loud, but it carried the devastating weight of absolute finality. "Your black cards are canceled. The estate access codes have been changed, and your personal belongings are currently sitting in garbage bags on the front lawn. My attorneys have already drafted the annulment papers. You will not see another single dime of my money for the rest of your miserable life." Beatrice shot up from her seat in the VIP section. Her face was contorted into an ugly, furious mask of sheer panic. She pointed a shaking finger at me, completely ignoring the devastation of her youngest son. "You vindictive, vicious monster!" Beatrice shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. "You planned this. You are publicly destroying this family over a minor indiscretion. You have no class. You have no decency." I turned my freezing gaze upon my mother-in-law. I did not raise my voice. I did not match her frantic energy. I simply tapped the tablet screen one final time. The massive LED board, illuminated with the official verified text transcript of her voicemail, accompanied by the audio playback of her own voice filling the grand ballroom. "Once your pathetic little logistics firm is fully liquidated and the assets are absorbed into Harper's Family Trust, she is purchasing a luxury penthouse for me in Boca Raton. Oceanfront views, exclusive beach access. I supported this affair because Harper is buying me the lifestyle I deserve." The society women seated directly next to Beatrice literally stood up and walked away from her. They looked at her with sheer, undeniable disgust. She had not just covered up an affair, she had actively plotted the financial ruin of her own daughter-in-law and applauded the devastating betrayal of her own son entirely for a condominium. Beatrice looked around frantically, realizing she was suddenly entirely alone. The social standing she valued above human life had just been permanently eradicated. Julian looked at the towering screen displaying his mother's betrayal, then at the horrified, condemning faces of his peers, and finally at me. His arrogant, superior posture entirely collapsed. He was completely penniless. He was publicly exposed as a gullible, easily manipulated fool. His family was shattered, his mistress was a fraud, and he was legally implicated in a massive federal theft scheme. He had absolutely nowhere left to run. A guttural, primal sound of pure, unadulterated panic tore from his throat. His eyes went wide with violent, irrational desperation. He vaulted over the wooden podium, his hands curled into tight fists, lunging directly across the stage toward me, in a blind, aggressive frenzy. Before he could close the distance, before the hired venue security could even react, the heavy oak doors at the back of the grand banquet hall swung wide open with a concussive, deafening crash. A tactical team of United States federal marshals alongside Atlanta local police flooded into the Grand Magnolia Ballroom. The sheer velocity of their entrance shattered whatever remained of the country club's refined atmosphere. Julian froze mid-lunge, his arms suspended in the air, as a dozen heavily armed officers formed a perimeter around the stage. The wealthy guests, who had not already fled to the edges of the room, now scattered like terrified prey, slipping on spilled champagne and abandoning their designer clutches in a desperate bid to distance themselves from the blast zone. Julian Brooks, the lead marshal, barked, his voice a deep, authoritative boom that required no microphone. "You are under arrest." Two local officers vaulted onto the stage, grabbing Julian by the shoulders and slamming him face first onto the polished mahogany floor. The sound of his custom velvet tuxedo tearing against the wood was violently satisfying. Handcuffs ratcheted tightly around his wrists with a cold metallic click. Julian writhed against the officers, his face contorted in absolute denial. "This is a mistake!" Julian screamed, spitting blood from a busted lip where he had struck the floor. "Do you know who I am? I'm a respected businessman. My wife is hysterical. She is setting me up. You are being charged with 3 counts of federal wire fraud, 2 counts of grand larceny, and the criminal forgery of a $500,000 commercial mortgage document," the marshal recited, with clinical precision, hauling Julian up to his knees. "The Securities and Exchange Commission has already secured your accounts. You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you use it." Harper watched the scene unfold with wide, unblinking eyes. She pressed herself against the velvet curtains, attempting to blend into the shadows of the stage. A female marshal stepped directly into her path. Harper let out a pathetic whimpering sob, holding her hands protectively over her pregnant stomach in a desperate bid for sympathy. "Please," Harper begged, her voice trembling violently. "I do not know anything about his business. I am just his sister-in-law. I am pregnant. You cannot do this to me." The marshal did not flinch. "Harper Brooks, you are under arrest as a primary co-conspirator in a federal money laundering and fraud operation. Put your hands behind your back." The heavy steel cuffs snapped shut over Harper's wrists, brutally scraping against the $85,000 Cartier diamond she had flaunted all evening. The blinding gemstone caught the red and blue flashing lights from the police cruisers idling outside the country club windows. It looked like blood. Down in the front row, the reality of the situation finally pierced Beatrice's thick veil of arrogance. She watched her golden son being dragged across the stage and her lucrative meal ticket being read her Miranda rights. Self-preservation kicked in with vicious immediacy. Beatrice scrambled to her feet, her heavy diamond necklace swinging wildly. She threw herself toward the lead detective standing near the stairs. "Officer, you must listen to me!" Beatrice cried hysterically, tears ruining her expensive makeup. "I am completely innocent. I had absolutely nothing to do with their disgusting little scheme. Julian has always been reckless and that girl manipulated him. I am a respectable widow. You must let me go. I am a victim here." I walked slowly down the short flight of stairs, moving with the serene, unbothered grace of a predator who had successfully cornered her prey. I stopped directly beside the lead detective. I reached into the pocket of my crimson blazer and withdrew a sleek silver flash drive. "Detective," I said, my voice smooth and perfectly audible over Beatrice's hysterical sobbing. "You will find the complete unaltered audio files on this drive. I highly recommend you review the 4th track immediately. It is a recorded voicemail from Beatrice Brooks, explicitly detailing her knowledge of the corporate fraud, her active participation in the extortion plot, and her demand for a luxury Florida condominium in exchange for concealing federal crimes." Beatrice's mouth dropped open in sheer, horrified silence. The detective accepted the drive, slipping it into an evidence bag without breaking eye contact with my mother-in-law. "Ma'am," the detective said, motioning for an officer. "Please place your hands behind your back." "No!" Beatrice shrieked, thrashing wildly as the officer secured her wrists. "Maya, you cannot do this. You are destroying your own family. You owe us." Julian was currently being dragged past the podium, his expensive shoes scrambling uselessly for purchase on the hardwood floor. He locked eyes with me, his face pale and slick with panicked sweat. "Maya," he screamed, his voice cracking in sheer terror. "Maya, please stop them. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. I will sign whatever you want. Please do not let them take me." I did not offer him a single word. I did not even grant him a smile. I simply stepped past him and approached Beatrice, who was currently sobbing against the officer holding her arms. I pulled a crisp, thick legal envelope from the interior breast pocket of my blazer. I tucked it neatly into the front pocket of Beatrice's designer evening jacket. "What is that?" Beatrice choked out, staring down at the envelope with wide, terrified eyes. "That is a formal notice of eviction." "Beatrice," I stated, maintaining a voice so chillingly calm, it made the nearby officers shift uncomfortably. "You always loved bragging about your sprawling suburban estate. You loved reminding me that Julian bought it for you to ensure you lived like a queen. The truth is, Julian never had the capital to secure that mortgage. I bought that house 3 years ago using a proxy holding company to protect my personal assets from your greedy, parasitic family. I am the sole legal owner." Beatrice's knees buckled, the officer holding her upright, as the devastating reality crashed down upon her. "You have exactly 48 hours to vacate the premises." I continued, stepping back to give the officers room to work. "If a single item remains in that house by Monday morning, the county sheriffs will drag it to the curb. Have a wonderful evening, Beatrice. I hear the holding cells downtown are surprisingly drafty this time of year." I turned and walked back through the grand ballroom. The remaining elite guests parted silently, their faces pale with shock and awe. They had arrived expecting a high society celebration. Instead, they had witnessed a flawless, absolute execution. I walked out into the cool Atlanta night air, the flashing lights of the police cruisers illuminating my path to freedom. 6 months later, the harsh, sticky humidity of the Atlanta summer had surrendered to a crisp, bright autumn. I stood on the sprawling, wraparound balcony of my new penthouse suite, located on the top floor of a gleaming glass skyscraper in Midtown. The view was breathtaking, an uninterrupted panorama of the city skyline rising sharply against the brilliant blue sky. The air up here was completely silent. There were no arrogant demands echoing down the hallways. There were no manipulative whispers or toxic complaints. The space belonged entirely to me. The fallout from that explosive night at the country club had been absolute and thoroughly devastating. Julian's trial was brief and lacking any real suspense. Faced with the mountain of forged documents, the pristine audio confessions, and the irrefutable trail of illicit wire transfers, he was left entirely defenseless. His high-priced defense attorneys abandoned him the moment his remaining credit cards declined. He accepted a brutal plea deal to avoid spending decades behind bars. He is currently serving a lengthy federal sentence in a medium-security facility, completely stripped of his tailored suits, his arrogant pride, and his delusional ambitions. Harper's descent into ruin was even more spectacular. The Securities and Exchange Commission tore her family's fraudulent empire down to the studs. Her father was indicted and incarcerated, leaving her completely destitute and publicly disgraced. Without Julian's stolen funds to bail her out, she was left to face the brutal reality of a bankrupt existence. Malik, true to his word, exhibited absolutely zero mercy. He filed for sole physical and legal custody of the child. Armed with my recording of her vicious, unhinged confession, declaring she despised him and only wanted his money, the family court judge did not hesitate. Harper is currently fighting a losing battle with an overworked public defender living out of a cheap motel, while Malik builds a stable, loving environment for a child he chose to protect. Beatrice was not spared from the wreckage. Her dreams of a luxury oceanfront condominium in Boca Raton evaporated the moment the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. While she managed to avoid federal prison by turning state's evidence against her own son, her social execution was permanent. She was unceremoniously evicted from the suburban estate exactly 48 hours after the gala. The wealthy socialites she had worshipped for decades shunned her completely, treating her like a walking plague. She now resides in a cramped, poorly ventilated, low-income apartment on the extreme outskirts of the city. She spends her days entirely alone checking a bank account that permanently reads zero and desperately trying to call former friends who blocked her numbers 6 months ago. I turned away from the balcony railing and walked back inside through the sliding glass doors. My new home office was a sanctuary of modern design and ruthless efficiency. A massive polished marble desk sat in the center of the room. Resting perfectly in the center of the dark stone was a thick stack of legal documents printed on heavy bonded paper. It was a government logistics contract. The irrevocable blind trust had protected my empire flawlessly, allowing my team to operate smoothly, while Julian's world burned to ash. Without his constant reckless spending, draining the corporate accounts, our profit margins had skyrocketed. We had secured unprecedented domestic routes, expanding our fleet by 40%. I picked up a heavy gold fountain pen and flipped to the final page of the contract. It was a massive $50 million supply chain agreement, partnering my firm directly with the Federal Emergency Management Agency. It was the largest single acquisition in the history of my company, and I had negotiated every single term by myself. I signed my name with a fluid, confident stroke, the ink bleeding dark and permanent into the page. I set the pen down and walked over to the built-in wet bar. I pulled a bottle of vintage Dom Perignon from the chilled refrigerator, the exact same vintage they had served at the country club on the night of my supposed defeat. I popped the cork, the cheerful crisp sound echoing beautifully in the quiet penthouse. I poured the golden bubbling liquid into a crystal flute. I walked back out onto the balcony, raising the glass toward the sprawling, shimmering city below. I took a slow, deeply satisfying sip. The champagne tasted like absolute victory. There were no toxic in-laws demanding unearned loyalty. There was no draining, treacherous husband trying to sever my wings. There was only the quiet, triumphant success of a woman who had built an empire, protected it from absolute ruin, and emerged completely untouchable. The war was over. I had won. The story masterfully illustrates the critical importance of maintaining emotional control and strategic foresight in the face of absolute betrayal. Maya's ability to suppress her immediate anger and play the role of the defeated victim allowed her adversaries to become hopelessly overconfident. By refusing to react impulsively to Julian's cruel eviction and Beatrice's vicious gloating, Maya successfully gathered the necessary intelligence to uncover their monumental financial crimes. True power does not come from screaming the loudest. It comes from quiet preparation, knowing your actual worth and allowing toxic individuals to dig their own inescapable graves. Tell us in the comments if you would have maintained your composure under that kind of pressure, and make sure to subscribe for the explosive finale.